A journey across space. A world taken over by killer robots. A tale of a little bird who becomes the universe. A story that takes place over an unimaginable amount of time. What it means to be human, and the most suffering ever witnessed. All compressed into a game you can play in a single evening. It sounds impossible, but somehow all of this can be found in Towelket One More Time. Towelket One More Time, also known as just Towelket 1, is an RPG Maker game created in 2009 by Kanoshimi Hochikisu, also known as Kanao, which contains one of the most unique and well-written stories of all time. Even after 15 years, I've yet to see any game even come close to the scope or ideas presented in it, let alone with the same quality. Towelket 1 is no doubt the poster child of the Towelket One More Time series. It's easily recognized by anyone who calls themselves a Towelket fan, but it still remains an obscure gem of a game to the outside world. Due to a combination of a very late translation patch and being the third game of a series, many people never gave this game a chance. Now, if you haven't watched or played the previous games, don't worry. The story of Towelket 1 is completely separate from previous entries. In fact, some fans might even suggest playing this game first. There are references to previous games, but they aren't directly related to the plot. Most notably, there are some returning characters from the previous games, but they are clearly different people with no memories from the previous entries. I'll bring up any particular context from the previous games you need to know in the video when they come up. With that said, let me start sharing this game with you, so you can understand what makes this game so special. Immediately, the title screen stands out, as we're given a shot of this blue-haired girl staring right at us. This is Conchelle, the heroine of the series' first game, Towelket 3. What's notable is the digitally drawn illustration, making it stand out from the previous games in the series, and future titles too. We never see any other title screen like this ever again, which is a shame because of how nice Kanao's digital art is here. That's not to say I dislike the pixel art style though. Towelket 1 is a game where Kanao's art style evolved quite a bit, and we'll start seeing more detailed portrait sprites of the characters appear as they talk during the game. These are in a pretty distinct pixel art style, showing full body sprites of the characters as they talk, and often include weird little additions and accessories around the characters for seemingly no reason. It's a little goofy at times. As we can see, Conchelle taking the term plump to a whole new level here, and it looks like her bare stumpy crotch is exposed, but it's charming. Once we start the game, there's a lot to talk about, as the game starts in the back of a truck. First, here's our protagonist, Muchasu. Now, if you've seen Towelket 2, you might be thinking, hey wait a minute, that looks a lot like Mochi, the cow-loving protagonist from Towelket 2. But I assure you these are two completely different characters. To support this argument, we can find a box of Muchasu's collection of Cow-chan merchandise, the cowgirl idol who thanks him for coming to her fan meet. This is where the game introduces a collectible in the form of Cow-chan magazines. These don't change the story, but the text you get from these is pretty great. Think of this as an immediate introduction to how strange the writing can be in this game. Looking around, we figure out that Muchasu and his family are currently in the process of moving, and while his parents are in the front of the moving truck, Muchasu is stuck in the back with the rest of the cargo, which is probably illegal. When we're ready to progress, we can find a cardboard box with Muchasu's Towelket inside of it, which we can sleep inside of to progress. As Muchasu sleeps within the box, his parents bicker about how to get to their new home before suddenly hitting something on the road. The bump launches Muchasu out of the truck, sending him into the water below and starting the events of the game proper. When Muchasu first wakes up, we find that the cardboard box carried us over the ocean onto a remote island. That sounds pretty bad, but as the game puts it, it helps to be surrounded by some cute girls. We can talk to them to have them introduce themselves one by one. The first girl is Conchelle, a blue-haired girl with a bit of an attitude. The next girl is Yume, a red-haired, married woman. Then lastly is a polite, gray-haired girl with quite possibly the best name ever made for a character, Lasagna. She explains that the name of the island everyone is stuck on is called the Curse of Curves Island, and to demonstrate why it's called that, she asks Muchasu to try moving in a curve to see what happens. After Muchasu is violently launched into the air, the girls wait for him by an X-shaped mark on the ground, which Muchasu lands on. Apparently, for some reason on this island, whenever someone tries to walk in a curve, they will be launched and returned to this spot on the island. Therefore, everyone needs to walk in straight lines like a robot to avoid being flung back here. In the meantime, the girls have been preparing a raft to leave the island and ask for Muchasu's help to escape. This is such a strange and unique premise for a story, but in my last video for Towelket 2, I briefly mentioned that one aspect of the game is that the player can walk diagonally in it. However, walking diagonally was pretty buggy, and it was really easy for the player to accidentally walk out of bounds by doing so. Kanao took this idea and used it as an excuse to remove the diagonal movement in this game, while also making it an important story element. This might be one of the most creative ways to elevate a bug into canon status I've ever seen in a game. We're given a chance to look around and talk to the other characters here, who tell us a bit more about themselves. Pari compliments the other girls, mentioning that Conchelle gathered the wood by punching trees with her bare fists. Lasagna is described as a ladylike girl who's skilled with her fingers. PPU, on the other hand, just calls herself a run-of-the-mill married woman. Lasagna is busy making the raft, but she explains that even with it, it'll be difficult to leave the island. Even with oars, it'll be difficult to row back to civilization, as they're just a dainty group of little girls. Considering that Conchelle can break trees with her bare hands, I don't think they'll have any trouble, but maybe this is just more of a hint that we should stop being lazy and help. Conchelle, thankfully, offers to take us around the island when we talk to her, but don't get any weird ideas. She has zero interest in boys. She's just trying to be friendlier with us. This is where the game starts pushing a feature that will become a mainstay in the Towelket series, talk spots. Over the course of the game, these spots with the words "click" will appear, scattered throughout the maps. Upon interacting with one, the characters currently following us will chime in, talking about something related to the spot, or sometimes something completely different. These click spots, also called talk spots, don't sound too revolutionary at first. After all, there are a lot of RPGs where players can inspect things on the map, and then the player character will talk about what it is. Even this game started that way, with the boxes in the truck. However, these click spots are pretty unique, in that the topics that get brought up can vary wildly, and often involve everyone within your current party. They can talk about important story events, reveal deeper lore, or just be dumb jokes. Now, to be fair, the ones in Towelket 1 are pretty simple compared to how they're used in later games, and are usually not directly related to the story, but they do wonders for characterization. You can learn a lot about the characters' personalities, their quirks, and get a few laughs out of the strange things they say. You can technically skip these if you don't want to read the text, but a huge reason why the cast of Towelket 1 is so loved is because of the personality oozing from these click spots. And you'll probably find yourself seeking them out just to learn more about the characters and what they think. There's times where your only reason to enter a room is for a click event, and it's worth it just because the event is amusing. Sometimes these events give you bonus abilities too, which adds another reason to why you should check them out. I would love to cover all of these events in the video, but unfortunately it'd probably make the video like 3 hours longer. It's definitely a great reason to play Towelket 1 on your own if this video convinces you to do so. I'll briefly bring up what happens in the click events every once in a while, just so you weren't completely missing out. With Conchelle in our party, now we can explore the island. For a remote island, it's got some pretty suspicious high-tech stuff scattered around, like cameras. It's also infested with hostile vibrating screws, which introduce us to combat. Now, the combat in Towelket 1 mechanically isn't anything too unique if you have any experience with RPG Maker games. In fact, it's simpler than Towelket 3's combat, and if there's any notable flaw with it, it's that all the characters are very similar stat and moveset wise. However, it's actually got the most satisfying combat in my opinion of the original trilogy, just because the game balance is a lot better. For starters, this game actually has a decent difficulty curve. Although this is probably the easiest Towelket game to avoid encounters in so far, this game is hard enough that you'll actually want to seek out some enemies to prepare for the boss fights. In the previous games, bosses were generally easy enough that you had no need to fight normal encounters. But in Towelket 1, you'll get your ass kicked if you try to skip straight to the bosses. Bosses hit hard, and you'll need the levels and money to get stronger. This encourages you to actually have some strategy, as the better your strategy is, the less you'll need to grind. Your best bet, in my opinion, is to aim for two things: buffs and status effects. Buffs are very strong in this game, as they last for the entire battle, and even a single defense or attack buff makes a huge difference. Status effects are extremely useful, as they work on all bosses, and getting extra turns on a disabled boss can make a big difference. The most useful status effect by far is poison, as poison burns through bosses' HP extremely quickly. I found one of the best strategies was to poison the boss as quickly as possible, then buffing my defense and focusing on survival while the poison did most of the work. However, there is one problem with this strategy, and it's that your characters are very mana hungry in this game, and mana is at a premium. A lot of your abilities, especially early in the game, cost a ton of mana. Not only that, but a lot of status effect moves, as helpful as a status effect may be, don't have great chances of working. Early on, it's not uncommon to spend your entire mana bar trying to apply a status effect only for it to fail. This wouldn't be a problem if you could just restore your mana, but mana restoring items are very expensive in this game. You'll often have to decide between buying mana items, upgrading your party's gear, which also costs a ton, or just grinding more. It also doesn't help that full restore points in this game start getting rarer over time, and you'll have to go long stretches without free mana refills. The one saving grace you have, as ridiculous as it is, are these fruit trees scattered about. These give you apples and oranges, which restore health and mana respectively. The oranges in particular are a godsend, and although you might not realize it at first, these oranges are helpful for the entire game. Since mana restoring items are so expensive, these oranges will save you a ton of money. You only have a small opportunity to collect them at the start of the game, so definitely pick them up. If you want the game to be easier, you can purposely leave a screen and come back to respawn them just to get more. It's like how farming Poochie Juice in Towelket 3 made that game so much easier, and although it's not as powerful or easy to farm, you'll definitely be tracking how many oranges you have left at some point in the game. This is the only game I can think of where the difficulty is directly correlated with how many citrus fruits you collect at the very start. HP healing items are a lot cheaper, so you don't have to worry about the apples as much. You can just buy tons of cheap bread from the store, and you'll definitely want a lot of them too. It's a lot more cost efficient to heal through HP items than spending mana on healing spells. Hey, speaking of the store, what's this weird item here? Teasing item. Can be used to tease Lasagna while she sleeps. What the hell? That shit costs 18,000 yen? I'm not farming that. Although I am curious what it does. It's not worth it. Who would farm over 100 battles at the very start of the game to buy an item like this? Let's just get on with the story. Going deeper into the island, we find our way into a mysterious, scary cave, as Conchelle puts it. There's a mandatory encounter with a bunch of screw enemies, and upon defeating them, Conchelle seems very impressed with us. But don't worry, she's just complimenting our strength. Don't get any weird ideas. There's also a convenient warp back to the beach, which will be pretty handy to prepare for the upcoming boss. Make sure to upgrade your gear and buy some healing bread, as well as getting a full restore from Pari Yume. Thanks, PPU. Once we get to the back of the cave, we get a cutscene of a little cubicle robot talking to itself. It notices us and talks about getting all the data it needs, so it's going to rip out our brains and attacks us, starting the first boss fight of the game. This boss fight, despite being pretty straightforward, is your first hint that this game is going to be a lot harder than the previous games. You're forced into this boss fight without any real warning, and if you haven't prepared, you'll almost certainly get a game over. Even with upgraded armor, it can deal over half your life in a single hit, and it can charge up to do an attack that might one-shot you if you don't use the defend command. You probably don't have many skills, so your best bet is to buff Conchelle's attack, and then chug bread and hope it dies before you do. Using some oranges for mana to try and apply status effects can help you get some more turns in too. After we win, the robot cries out about some doctor and burns out. We can't get through the door the robot came from, but we can search the robot's body for an engine, just what we need for the raft. We can return to the shore and hand the engine to Lasagna to continue the story. The raft gets built, and the plan is to stay one more night on the island before going back home. Once night falls, we find Lasagna and PPU sleeping around a campfire. We can have fun poking the girls while they sleep. I guess this is where that teasing item would come in handy, but unfortunately it looks like we've missed our chance to get it. Oh well. At the edge of our camp, Conchelle is still awake, unable to sleep. She asks us if we can keep a secret and starts to take off her shirt in embarrassment. It's not because of what you think though. She starts to talk about a strange lump in the middle of her chest, like a solid object buried inside of her. She states that it wasn't there before she came to this island. She checks Muchasu's chest as well, and it turns out that there's a similar lump inside of him too. Conchelle states that she's sure the other two girls have it as well, but she doesn't want to ask them because it's too embarrassing. Getting flustered, she then storms off to bed. Morning breaks, and the girls are lined up, ready to get on the raft and leave the island. We can talk to them one more time, with Conchelle asking us to keep the talk from last night a secret before we head for home. Unfortunately, even though the group leaves the island, they still continue to walk like robots, in fear of the curse of curves sending them back to the island. We're brought to a scene of Lasagna knocking on Muchasu's door, calling him to go to school for the day, while Conchelle watches from behind a tree. Walking outside, Lasagna greets him, encouraging him to go to school. It sounds like there's some trouble happening because of our robotic condition. Muchasu points out Conchelle hiding behind a tree, but don't worry, she wasn't hiding, she just saw a weird bug on the tree. Lasagna comments on how it's amazing that there's always a bug on that exact spot, so it seems like they've been doing this for a while. Now here's something extremely important. After the two girls join you, you'll want to go back into Muchasu's room. Upon interacting with the desk, you'll acquire the February edition of the Cow-chan magazine. This is only possible with the two girls in your party, and probably the magazine most people miss in the game. If you don't get it now, you'll miss your chance to get it forever. In this one, Cow-chan talks about how happy she is when her fans drink her milk. Walking towards school, we can find Yume, who wishes us a good day at school. There are also a couple of pawns just wandering about, which is kind of funny. In the previous two games, the pawns were a sort of secret species that were hidden from humans due to being too tiny to see, but here they're just sort of chilling around town like it's nothing special. We can also explore some of the buildings around town, like Lasagna's home. There's lots of talking points referencing the past games, as well as some hints that the girls might have a bit of affection for Muchasu. I also just have to mention it now, but the music in this game is really great. Towelket has always had its own unique approach and charm when it comes to music, and I think this game is a perfect example of the classical era of Towelket's brand of music. Towelket games have a reputation for using public domain music, often classical music, and royalty-free tracks. Now, maybe this is a concept that's hard to explain if you aren't familiar with the rest of the series, but despite sounding like a lazy way out of composing your own music, there's some genuine thought that goes into picking out songs to fit your game. It takes time to consider which tracks fit each scene, and Towelket 1 really pulls this off well. It often uses great catchy classical tunes to fit more energetic parts of the game, such as combat or exploring an interesting environment, but it switches to emotional, royalty-free tracks for more serious and touching cutscenes within the game. Despite the term usually being associated with low-quality music, the songs chosen are actually really good, and I don't think a single one of them is unpleasant to listen to. I want to make this distinction because this era of Towelket games has a reputation for using public domain classical tracks. And while that's true, I think what really makes it shine are the carefully selected royalty-free tracks. The classical music is catchy and nostalgic, but the heavy lifting is from the hand-picked modern songs. Towelket 1 is definitely the perfect example of how a Towelket game can balance both forms of music. I think the only complaint I can make is that the soundtrack of this game isn't very large, which leads to some repetitive music. Sometimes you'll hear a really great track be used in more than one spot, which can kind of ruin the impact it has, but you'll probably only really notice this if you play the game more than once. Anyways, we finally reach school, and despite Lasagna's attempts to cheer us up, it seems Muchasu isn't so enthusiastic. During his day, he is forced to walk like a robot, causing the other kids to avoid him and call him Robotman. Since he's not a cute girl like Lasagna or Conchelle, most of the bullying falls on him. Trying to get away from the bullying, he goes to the roof of the school to avoid everyone. Conchelle finds him on the roof of the school. She says that she gets teased too, and offers to walk home with him in the most tsundere way possible. If Muchasu meets her at the entrance fast enough, then maybe she'll walk home with him. Taking control of Muchasu again, the click spots around school are really depressing, mentioning the different ways Muchasu has been bullied ever since he came to school. The one on the roof even talks about Muchasu thinking about throwing himself off the roof. Jesus Christ. The students are also here, so you can experience the bullying too. While the game said that Lasagna and Conchelle don't get bullied as much, you can find mentions of Conchelle crying from being bullied too. I personally think of this discrepancy as Muchasu not realizing that the girls are getting treated just as badly as he is, since he's too focused on his own troubles, which is a theme that will get touched on more later. Meanwhile, at the front of the school, Lasagna is waiting for Muchasu to walk home with everyone. Conchelle tells her that Muchasu is too busy and left early. She also claims that she'll be doing something important too, so Lasagna should just head home by herself. She's clearly lying to Lasagna so she can be alone with Muchasu, as we know, solidifying a love triangle rivalry between the two. By the time we get outside, it just so happens that Conchelle was about to leave. She states that Lasagna couldn't be bothered to wait for Muchasu, and she ditched us because she's heartless. Wow, what a dick move. Lasagna, who is hiding behind a tree, calls her out for lying, and Conchelle just goes, "Whoops, you got me," and the scene ends. It seems like a sudden resolution, but we'll learn later that this event won't be forgotten. Night falls, and within Muchasu's house, the phone begins to ring. Picking it up, we can see that two robots are calling Muchasu, laughing like it's a prank call. The robots, imitating Lasagna, claim to be in Muchasu's classroom at school, and also she's naked and needs Muchasu's help before hanging up. I love how the robots seem to be hoping Muchasu would be tempted by a nude Lasagna, but when you check the phone he just says, "Lasagna must be at school." Like that was the most notable thing about that call, and he's just casually convinced. We travel towards the school to help the very real nude Lasagna. You can spot a fake Muchasu on the way over, but I guess Muchasu doesn't notice. Inside of the school, we bump into a ghost cat girl called Fufufu-san. She takes a liking to Muchasu and decides to haunt him. It seems a little random, but she's going to be one of our biggest friends gameplay-wise. In Muchasu's classroom, we find Lasagna, hiding between a bunch of lockers. Upon talking to her, it reveals itself to actually be a robot, who says it'll be taking us back to the island and taking our brains. It chases us out into the hallway where Muchasu is trapped by another robot. In a panic, he curves around the corner and gets launched back to the Curse of Curves Island. Instead of landing in the familiar open-air camp, we land in a new location, an unfamiliar metal laboratory with the three girls already pacing around the room. Lasagna talks about us having a wonderful night with her, while Conchelle is talking about marriage, so it seems like they were tricked in a similar way. Trying to open the door, it's obviously locked. A robot comes in, saying it's time to extract Muchasu and Conchelle's brains, calling them number 4 and 3 respectively. The two follow the robot out of the room before Conchelle knocks it over and tells us to run, saying she'll stay behind to beat up the robot. This starts a long chase section of the game where we have to traverse a bunch of rooms with robots chasing us. And if one of them touches us, it's an instant game over. There's some pretty funny jokes here, like the robots tempting you to enter rooms with promises of EXP. There are some rooms you can find where they number the girls. Conchelle and Lasagna have pretty typical descriptions, but Yume is stated to have an almighty personality, and says she is to mass-produce multiple personalities. What the heck does that mean? One more thing to get here too is the March edition of the Cow-chan magazine. This one is actually sort of easy to miss because of the gray color of the book blending in with the floor, and you'll probably be focused on the robots chasing you. If you get unlucky, you can end up in an unavoidable game over here trying to get the magazine, so make sure you save at the start of the room. This one is about Cow-chan taking a bath and brushing herself. It's very important. We eventually escape the laboratory, finding ourselves in the cave at the start of the game. We run all the way down to the beach, but with no raft, it's a dead end. The fridge nearby seems like the best hiding spot, but it's freezing cold inside. Luckily, it ends up that Muchasu's favorite Towelket is still in the box nearby, which might keep him warm enough. He then crawls into the fridge to hide. Back at the laboratory, we see that Conchelle's plan didn't work out so great. She's been strapped to a surgical table, and the robots extract her brain while the cheerful tunes of The Entertainer play. Muchasu, hiding within the fridge, realizes that after a while, none of the girls seem to have made it out with him. Deciding he can't just hide forever, he tries to leave the fridge to go save them, but the door of the fridge is stuck. Not only that, but the fridge is cold enough that not even a Towelket will help him. He feels his body temperature dropping before... We're brought to the scene of a strange flying girl who resembles Yume. She finds the fridge containing Muchasu's body, now encased in an ice cube, and brings it into a nearby laboratory. Confirming that the thing in the ice is alive, she thaws Muchasu out. The girl then introduces herself as Armstrong, or just Armtan for short, and welcomes us to the future. We can ask her some questions, like what year it is. After looking up what the Gregorian calendar is, she states that it's been roughly 2 million years since we were frozen in the ice. We can also mention that she looks similar to Yume, but Arm just seems to refer to her as number 1, and wonders if that's true. We're at a scrap factory owned by someone named Momen-sama. Next to us, we can find a screw, which was apparently embedded into our brain. I guess it fell out, or Armstrong removed it for us. There's also a so-called creepy robot that looks exactly like Muchasu for some strange reason. Going to the right, we can find Momen-sama. He's a pawn like one of the ones we saw in town before. He also looks suspiciously a lot like Pawn Groom from one of the previous games, but don't worry, he's someone totally different. He suggests we look outside to get a better understanding of what's going on. In the meantime, he'll do some research into what we are, as he has no idea what species we are. Whatever this future is, humans clearly haven't been around for a long time, and he's convinced we're some sort of trilobite. You know, I can actually see the resemblance. Going back to Armtan, she suggests that it'd be too dangerous to go outside as a human, so we should disguise ourselves in the convenient Muchasu look-alike robot suit. After getting dressed, we're finally free to explore the outside world. It ends up that after 2 million years, things have changed quite a lot on Earth. The way the game describes how the world has changed through NPC dialogue is really great here, and speaking to the robots reveals a lot of clues on the current state of Earth. Robots have taken over the world, covering it in metal and steel. Humanity has been wiped out, that much is clear, but all biological life in general as well. You might see some plant-like things on screen, but upon inspection they're described as artificial. Even the sky is artificial, as the growing and expanding sun has been blocked out by huge metal plates to avoid the planet being scorched, and all the light we see is just from light bulbs. Seeing just how much the robots have mechanized and sterilized the planet of anything natural really drives home the idea of a robots versus life angle. You really get the feeling that you've been thrust into this hostile world that hates you and wants you and everything even remotely related to you dead. And just in case you had any doubts that you'd be killed on the spot if they realized you were a human, there's still talk about how the robots are still hunting for number 4, Muchasu. Even after 2 million years, the robots are still actively hunting for him, stuck on their original goal despite the unlikelihood of a human living that long. We're free to explore this area, but the game doesn't really make it clear on how to progress. If we want to continue, we need to go into this building where we find some hooligan robots. This starts a fight against 3 robot enemies, which shouldn't be hard if you've leveled up enough to get an AoE skill. Unfortunately, even though we win the battle, Muchasu's robot suit breaks. Seeing a chance to be a jerk, one of the hooligan robots calls for a disposal robot to come over and collect us. We then find ourselves in a new area, able to move again. A nearby robot tells us that this is a disposal site, and in 2 hours it's going to heat up and melt everything inside for recycling. This is the start of a little dungeon area where we'll have to fight our way out. Thankfully, the game is gracious enough to give us a healing crystal, so it's a great idea to do a few fights here at the start. Fufufu-san is also here, and true to her word, 2 million years ago, she's followed us all the way here into the future. She shows her usefulness as a shopkeeper from time to time, and she's a huge help here. She's selling items that can teach skills to your party members, and although all of them are helpful, the best one by far is the Fufufu-san's acid skill. This ability has a pretty high chance to inflict the poison status, which as mentioned earlier is incredibly strong. I can't recommend buying this ability enough. Another item I would suggest buying would be the cardboard item from the armor vendor. Despite slowing you down, and cardboard probably sounding like awful armor, it gives you a lot of defense and resistance to stab attacks, which is very helpful. Once you feel like you're ready to go and you've collected any scattered items in this dump, you'll find a giant robot boss blocking the exit door. This fight might unironically be the hardest boss fight in the game. You're all by yourself, which means you need to spend an entire round to heal, and it hits like a truck. Furthermore, he can buff his attack and poison you. If he decides to buff up his attack to max and inflicts poison on you, you'll be taking a lot of damage every turn. Not only that, but he can charge up to do a really strong double attack, which can do a ton of damage. I actually died a couple of times here to this boss because I tried to beat him without grinding, and got caught off guard when he did 75% of my life in a single turn. Oh hey, it's Mitsue from Towelket too. Yeah, she's just here for the game over screen for some reason, even though she doesn't really appear in this game. Your best strategy will be to use the Fufufu-san acid attack to poison him, then focus on buffing your defense and healing while the poison does its work. Unfortunately, the Fufufu-san acid attack will eat up most of your mana at this point, so you might need to use an orange or two. It helps a lot to stock up on uranium to heal beforehand. Oh yeah, since all life on Earth is gone, the healing bread from the start of the game has been replaced by uranium in stores, since robots have no use for human food. How is Muchasu consuming uranium to heal? It's probably best not to ask. When we beat the robot and get past the door it was guarding, we find that the disposal site was part of Momon's scrap factory, and we are now back in the room with Armtan. It seems like it's night now as she's sleeping. Momon, on the other hand, is floating in a brine tank, or at least just his head. Here, it's revealed that he's the only living creature left on the planet, and he's been passing himself off as a robot with a robot body. To keep himself alive for so many years, he soaks his head in a brine tank overnight. While we were gone, he recognized us as a member of the long-extinct Homo sapiens species, as well as being part of the number 1 through 4 incident. To help us understand what's happening, he's created a room with notes and robot replicas to explain what's going on. 2 million years ago, the little robos were made by a professor whose goal was to create the perfect thinking program by using data from 4 specific individuals. Everyone was brought to an island and modified to force them to act like robots through the curse of curves. However, the brain of Muchasu was never collected, resulting in the robots running amok. Within a week, they took over the planet, slaughtering every human on Earth, and they still haven't stopped searching for him. The 3 girls are also described nearby, giving us explanations over their clashing personalities and how this apparently related to making the perfect thinking program. It describes Lasagna and Conchelle as 2 opposites, demure and calm versus hot-tempered. However, for Pari Yume, it just calls her an average everyday girl, like she's not even anything special. Imagine being chosen out of billions of people on Earth because you're supposedly the perfect example of being a boring, ordinary person. Momin, being the last remaining life form, vowed to take revenge against the robots someday. He plans on recovering the test subjects, the 3 girls who are still held captive by the little robos. He thought that number 4, us, would never be found, but with us, it's possible to collect all of the test subjects at once. Once he has all of the test subject bodies, he plans to make Armtan into the perfect robot, who will destroy all of the little robos. Basically, he's asking us to go rescue the girls to stop the robots. Tomorrow, we will go out to start our rescue mission. For now, we'll rest during the night. Before sleeping, you can read the April issue of the Cow-chan magazine. In this edition, she talks about wearing a frilly apron and how her big boobs get in the way, but they're stuck to her stomach, so she can't help it. Unfortunately, there's nothing really resembling a bed in this future, so Muchasu decides to just curl up on the floor. At least lay on the table or something, man. As Muchasu sleeps, he has a strange dream where he sees a bird and himself floating in the middle of space. Muchasu notices the bird, and it chirps Chun at him before the dream ends. Once morning breaks, Momin and Armtan are ready to go. He explains the mission to us again, and says we'll be following the robots as they take the train to work. A strangely human-like approach to robot labor. The 2 join us, and we can explore the city again. One thing I have to note here is that after the 2 join your party, you can inspect the screw on the floor again. Momin explains that it was implanted into our brain, and it was responsible for making us warp whenever we did a curve. Essentially, it's what forced the curse of curves on us. But wasn't the game hinting that it was the lump in our chest that was potentially responsible for this warping behavior? It wasn't stated directly, so the thing in our chest could be something else, but the game doesn't actually ever specify what it was. For now, just keep this screw in mind since it'll be important later. With the 2 following us, there's some pretty amusing talk points as we work our way towards the train station. Before leaving the lab, we can inspect this table where the 2 explain what a desk is, assuming we're so primitive that we don't even know what it might be. We also get called a sapient homo by Armtan. Thanks. Momin and Armtan have some great chemistry together, and there's some good jokes along the way. There's this strange joke in a talk point where Armtan decides to snuggle Muchasu to be nice, and then the next talk point has Momin do the same thing, which may or may not be as appealing to you. It's also a good idea to do a couple of battles, because unfortunately, our 2 new party members are level 1 with no gear, making them pathetically weak. When we're at the train station, we can see it's full of robots clamoring to get a ticket, although there's some interesting unfamiliar robots mixed in. Blue little robots called number 3s, with a bit of an attitude. They don't seem too interested in talking. We then climb aboard a train, with Momin and Armtan helpfully explaining nebulous concepts like what a train is, rails, and the mysterious concept known as electricity. He understands if it's too much for us to get though. On the train, Momin talks to us and points out the number 3 robots, explaining that these robots were created using Conchelle's personality. Even though the robots couldn't use Conchelle for their perfect thinking program, they made a horde of robot clones of her to use for labor. Our job is to reclaim Conchelle's body, which the robots are using to make these number 3 robots. Momin then states that we should go to the front of the train to get off at the station. The game has the self-awareness to comment on how it doesn't matter where we are on the train, and lampshades that this is pretty clearly just an excuse for a train dungeon, but you can talk to all of the Conchelle robots on the way. There's some talk points with Armtan, talking about how she's enjoying her time with Muchasu, how she feels being a robot, and wondering what it'd be like to be a human, as well as the May edition of the Kao-chan book series. This one talks about Kao-chan's workout routine of jogging, which causes her boobs to flop around, and how sweaty she gets in the sauna. Yes, this is very important. Finally, we arrive at Clattering City, the location where the number 3 robots are produced. We can explore the city, discovering a construction zone and a large department store. We can learn that Armtan loves sofas, but her butt jets will melt them if she tries to sit on them. There's a lot of random things to find around the city, but the building we're interested in is the production plant on the far right. However, we're not allowed inside because we're not authorized. To get inside, we can sneak around the back using the construction zone. The entrance to the construction zone is guarded by a Conchelle robot, so we'll unfortunately have to beat her up to get inside. It's okay, they're just robots after all, so there's no need to get upset, right? The construction zone is basically just another dungeon, taking place over a bunch of dangerous high-floating platforms. You'll probably want to do some fights to level up Arm and Momin for the upcoming boss fight. With 3 people in your party, it's thankfully a bit easier, but only if Armtan and Momin can carry their own weight. The boss has 2 minions and party-wide attacks that make the fight quite a bit harder. Poisoning the boss is a great idea as always, and cardboard armor can help reduce the boss's damage quite a bit. Just get ready to use a good number of healing items to get through the AoE attacks. If you got a second copy of Fufufu-san's acid attack, then it's a great idea to give it to Armtan to help. Past the boss, we climb into a back window to enter the storage room of the production plant. Momin suggests that we rest here for a bit since we need to wait for the robots to leave work. For now, we take a nap while we wait for night. We're then brought to a vision of something that happened 2 million years ago. We see the beach of the Curse of Curves Island, the mutilated corpse of Lasagna lying between 2 robots. One of them expresses concern over the state of her body, but the other states it doesn't matter as long as they have the brain. They talk about the missing 4th specimen, wondering where he went and joking about how long a human could possibly hide from robots. Of course, we know that Muchasu is hidden in that fridge right next to them. It seems like a random scene, but we'll learn that this is hinting at something for later, hidden underneath a layer of irony. After the scene fades back, it's time for Muchasu and company to infiltrate the building to find Conchelle. Here we have another dungeon, this time with a sort of strange stealth segment. There are security robots that spin around, and if they spot Muchasu, then they'll force an annoying battle on us. However, if we sneak up on them, we can take them out instantly, rewarding us EXP as if we beat them. It's a little janky, and there's one room where one of the security robots is already pointing right at the entrance of the room, so it's easy to get cheaped into a battle, but it's a pretty interesting mix-up in gameplay. It's worth going through all of the rooms to get the stealth kill EXP for upcoming bosses, as well as inspecting all of the rooms full of dormant Conchelle bots. During our exploration, we find a strange bunny-like robot. This is the very cruel rabbit, who has been mentioned earlier from NPC dialogue, and it ends up that he runs this factory. True to his name, he seems to have a hatred of living things and attacks us. Thankfully, he's pretty easy, especially with all the EXP we got from the security robots. He then short-circuits and we steal his key. Using the key, we find the vault where Conchelle is being kept. Her body is floating in a glass case, being held against her will for millions of years to produce robots of her. There's this sort of touching, melancholic music playing, and then Momin commands Armtan to swallow Conchelle and the case whole to store her. The case that's way bigger than she is. Before we can even think about how that would work, Momin starts blowing up the building, which I guess is to ensure the robots can't continue to produce more robots. This causes the building to go into high alert, and the Conchelle robots activate to attack us. We escape the building and run to the left side of town. It looks like a dead end, but Momin and Armtan call out for an ancient battleship, a pawned spacecraft left by his ancestors. Unfortunately for us, the ship parks on the top road rather than the bottom one, and the very cruel rabbit is blocking our way, this time with some backup. The very cruel rabbit then mocks Momin, talking about how long it's been since he massacred the pawn race and how much he enjoyed their screams. We get forced into a boss battle, and during it, the very cruel rabbit even starts playing the song from Pawn Town in the earlier Towelket games, claiming it's the song they played during the massacres. Clearly he got his name from being responsible for the extinction of the pawn species, and gives Moment a more personal reason for his motives. Thankfully, despite being intimidating, he's not a terribly tough boss fight. He's stronger than last time and has some backup, but he's still not going to give you any trouble now that your party should be properly leveled. We beat him up, he short circuits once again, and we get on the pawn battleship. Inside of the battleship are some more friendly robots that have been maintaining it for years. But to the right there's something more important. The July issue of Cow-chan's monthly magazine! Yes, I know we're fleeing for our life here, but life just isn't worth living without Cow-chan. This magazine is the swimsuit edition, where Cow-chan talks about wearing human swimsuits, but they don't fit her properly since she's a cow, so she swims naked instead. Once we reach the controls of the ship, Moment starts the takeoff sequence to escape. The very cruel rabbit, who has already recovered, has run back to the Conchelle factory, and demands that the Conchelle bots pilot spaceships to go after us. We're now flying through space, trying to escape from the horde of fighter ships after us. It looks like the pawn battleship is too slow and they're going to catch up, so Moment tells Armtan to use her secret weapon, the Armstrong cannon. Armtan then goes to the top of the ship and erects her secret cannon. The Armstrong cannon fires a massive laser, instantly destroying the entire Conchelle robot fleet. The game hints that the cannon was so powerful that its effects were even felt on Earth, but we'll hear about that later. We're then left on the ship, letting us explore around a bit. Armtan and Moment have already gone downstairs and seem to be shooting some kind of broadcast now. We can ask Armtan about the cannon, and I love how you can ask her if she's doing okay, and she just answers bluntly, "No, I have to cool down my tummy for the next 15 years now." Then we can ask Moment about what he's doing, and he pulls us in front of the camera for a broadcast, dressing up in a suit before starting. Moment hijacks the robot's TV signal, disguised as the mysterious MM figure. He mocks the robots, talking about how he blew up the Conchelle factory and has now claimed 2 of the subject bodies. He then states that he's going to blow up the pawn ship, killing Muchasu and Conchelle, which will permanently foil the robots' plans at making the Perfect Thinking program, as revenge for the slaughtering of living beings. Armtan then cuts the recording. Now obviously, we're a little concerned about the whole being blown up thing, but Moment tells us that it's all just an act, and we'll safely escape while we fake our deaths. I think blowing up your ancient ancestor's battleship minutes after climbing onto it definitely cements Moment into some sort of madman category. As the ship explodes, we get a strange little scene. In this chapter, we suddenly find ourselves in control of a Conchelle robot. We're being called to action by the very cruel rabbit. Talking around, it looks like this is just a little bit in the past, just after we snatched Conchelle's body from the robots. We're essentially playing out the past few minutes of gameplay, but from a different perspective. The Conchelle robots are definitely acting like Conchelle, but are otherwise doing the bidding of the very cruel rabbit with only a little bit of complaining. We move into the company building and are briefed on the situation, and soon end up on a fighter ship to attack Moment's ship. We see the Armstrong cannon being fired again, but this time our screen goes black as our ship is destroyed. We see the strange creature from the scene earlier, watching the explosion from a yellow planet, mourning the loss of life. We then find ourselves crashed onto said planet, our spaceship destroyed. Apparently, the Conchelle robot has no idea where this planet is, and our transmitter is broken. She starts complaining about feeling something wrong, a long-forgotten feeling, the feeling of fear. Next to our crash site, we find a screw in the ground. This screw is revealed to be a device that came loose from our body, which suppresses the emotions of the Conchelle robots. This screw removed the Conchelle robots' abilities to think for themselves, and now with it removed, the Conchelle robot we are controlling is no longer a robot, but for all intents and purposes, a clone of Conchelle with the heart and soul of the original. Next to our ship is a screen of some sort, and it catches the broadcast sent out by Momin. It doesn't seem to be working very well, but Conchelle catches a glimpse of Muchasu on the screen before it fizzles out. After 2 million years, she still remembers him and wants to see him. We travel to the left, finding scattered, destroyed bodies of other Conchelle robots who weren't as lucky as us. We find that we weren't the only ones whose emotional screw came loose, as the impact of being shot down dislodged the screw from everyone. We pass by more and more broken Conchelle robots, and strange wiggly constructs and masses of some kind. Eventually, we come across the green creature we saw earlier, standing over one of the broken Conchelle robots. The robot cries out, understanding that it is dying. It cries for Muchasu, and it desires to see him again before death. It begs for help from the green creature, but it states that there's nothing it can do. The robot repeats its desire to see Muchasu before death, begging, but the creature can only apologize. The robot says its last words, repeating Muchasu's name and crying for its mother, before it finally stops. The creature screams in frustration about how it's happening again and again. We approach it and it looks at us, thanking us for saving its soul. The game never names this creature in Towelket 1. He even says he is something with no name or purpose, but later on he'd be officially referred to as Kerbasdeeuusa, or Kerbas, due to the chapter's name, so I'll just call him Kerbas from here. Some time passes, and Kerbas tells us that hundreds of thousands of others, just like us, have crashed on this planet, and not a single time he has been able to save them. There's always a glimmer in the sky, and then they crash here to die. They always cry out for help and beg for their loved ones, but Kerbas can only stand there and watch, no matter how much they want to save them. This place is full of suffering, but it is powerless. Conchelle brushes off what Kerbas says and says that she's looking for someone, Muchasu. Kerbas asks if he could replace them, but Conchelle says that's impossible. Not that she's the real Conchelle either. We then learn that the strange wriggling shapes dotting the landscape are graves of the lives Kerbas could not save. The scene ends with the explosion of the pawn battleship in the background, just like we saw before. We're then brought back to Muchasu's point of view, as he gently drifts off into space. This seems like pretty bad planning on Momin's part, but it ends up that the robot suit isn't very well insulated, nor does it have air in it. Muchasu feels his body getting colder yet again as his body begins to freeze in deep space. Armtan and Momin finally realize that humans can't just safely fly around in the vacuum of space, but Armtan can't go after Muchasu as her current body isn't built for space exploration. Momin mentions that he has a secret space satellite which might help them, and now we're in deep space. It's a pretty short flight to the space satellite. It sounds like the plan is to transfer Armtan's memory, basically her mind, into a spacefaring model. Momin gets settled into a brain case on the satellite, as he needs to repair his body after all of the action. Nearby, there's some logs from Momin and Armtan, and a high-tech refrigerator. The spacefaring model ends up being a dormant Poochie, One of the characters from Towelket 3, a diary log next to her states that Momin stumbled across this satellite, as it was made by someone else a long time ago. Armtan then transfers herself into the Poochie robot, and immediately starts to realize that this robot can't stop saying, wow. It's also very plump, as you can see from the sprite. For most of the game from now on, Armtan will be sporting this Poochie look, but remember, it's still Armtan from the inside. Coming up will be a brief section where we'll be playing as a solo Armtan, and it can be a little difficult with just one character. It's a good idea to upgrade Armtan's gear if you can, as well as giving her any stat boosting screw items. Thankfully, Armtan keeps all of her experience and skills despite swapping bodies, so you don't have to start fresh from a level 1 character. As we leave, we see a scene where the very cruel rabbit reports the death of the subject bodies to the little robos. Just a reminder that even though the very cruel rabbit seems like a robot boss, he's still just an underling of the original little robos. However, the little robos aren't so easily fooled, claiming that there'd be no reason to destroy both Conchelle and Muchasu, when just killing Muchasu from the beginning would have foiled their plans. Therefore, he must have been bluffing, and they're still alive somewhere in the area, and they send out the rabbit to go look for them. Back to Armtan, we're now left in a large area of space to look for Muchasu, with scattered large asteroids. These asteroids seem to harbor a very strange form of life, made of abstract shapes. Some of these life forms even seem to have created what look like villages out of lumpy, patched materials. These intelligent life forms are called the Chun, and they talk in strange prophecies about time repeating, the endless cycle of suffering, and a yellow fluff of some form in an almost religious manner. Some of them are hostile and attack us using spears, showing their primitive nature. Exploring these areas is really mystical and bewildering. After being settled on the idea that the robots have wiped out all life, we find these abstract life forms in the corners of space. However, they're so alien and detached from humans, or even what we would normally associate with aliens in both looks and behavior. The blob-like, surreal look to everything gives off the impression that this is like a primordial form of life that's just barely begun to form into something. It doesn't just look strange either, as you'll find non-Euclidean structures like infinitely repeating houses within houses. Don't worry if it gets too uncomfortable though. Armtan is here to gladly tell you her opinion on things, like how this thing is a croissant, or this one is a chocolate coronet. She also really loves to talk about these weird protrusions and how they feel really nice to sit on. Look, she hasn't had a butt in a long time, so let her enjoy things, okay? Exploring the different villages, we find one that seems to have a bunch of Chun clamoring outside of a building about a recumbent one arriving. It might be related to Muchasu, who may or may not be dying right now, but nearby there's a house with the August edition of the Cow-chan magazine. In this one, Cow-chan laments the end of summer, but she'll be posting pictures of her wearing a yukata on her blog, so be sure to check it out. Another thing to note before you go is that Fufufu-san is here, and this time she's selling an upgraded version of Fufufu-san's acid, which is way more consistent at poisoning enemies. If you don't have the Fufufu-san acid on Armtan, this is a great time to get this ability to help you through future fights like this boss fight coming up. Inside of the building where Muchasu might be held, we find another building, and inside that one is another building, although you can still see the outside through the windows. Within that, we find another building, and so on. The signs tell us about the repeating nature of the universe, and how everything originates from a circle. After going through several houses within houses, we find some sort of procession taking place, with the Chun people looking at Muchasu. It sounds like they believe Muchasu's arrival foretells the arrival of some important figure or savior who is connected with everything. Of course, we don't have time for all that religious nonsense, so Armtan attacks the village chief to save Muchasu. This boss fight can definitely be a bit difficult if you haven't prepared, as they're outnumbered 3-1 and can take a lot of damage quickly. Equipping strong cardboard armor to reduce the Chu-chan spear stab attack helps a lot. Blow all of your mana on your strongest AoE attacks to try and remove the 2 minions as fast as possible, then poison the chief and let it do its work while you focus on keeping up your health. If you can land a snuggle attack, which you got from a talking point earlier in the game, you can even use it and then avoid attacking to let the poison do a ton of damage as the boss skips a bunch of turns. Otherwise, buff up your defense to help reduce damage. After winning, the Chu-chan seemed to vanish, talking about returning to the universe, into a presence that watches everything. What a bunch of weirdos. We finally get to save Muchasu, who has impressively been holding his breath the whole time. Or maybe he was just frozen. Armtan shares some oxygen with him, whatever that might entail, and we can now head back to the space satellite to meet Momin. Before we get there, we see a scene of Momin waiting in his tank, before the very cruel rabbit enters the room, mocking Momin by thanking him for finding number 4. Momin tells him that robots will never surpass humans, for they have no hearts, to which the very cruel rabbit responds by smashing Momin's case. We get back to the space satellite to find the very cruel rabbit waiting for us. Armtan demands to know what he's done with Momin, to which he casually states that he died. She attacks him in anger and tells us to hide somewhere safe. More robots will be coming soon. We look into the satellite's main room, where Momin's head is no longer moving. The only place to hide, it seems, is this high-tech refrigerator. Even Muchasu seems to know where this is going, but without anywhere else, he hides inside. Outside, the rabbit claims that even if Armtan kills him, other robots will be here soon. Without any other choice, Armtan activates a self-destruct sequence to finally take out the very cruel rabbit. Inside the fridge, Muchasu waits, hearing the explosion happening outside. There's no doubt something happened to Armstrong. Finding the courage to help, he decides he has to go outside and do something, but of course, his body is beginning to freeze once more. We're suddenly brought to the scene of something completely different. We are now playing as Chun, a small yellow bird of some kind. Talking to her mother, she says that tomorrow we will spread our wings and leave the nest as an adult. We will have our last dinner here together with our sister. It seems Chun is pretty anxious, but his big sister reassures him that it'll be fine. We then have dinner together, Chun remembering what it was like when he first hatched from his egg. His mother then begins to talk about what it was like for her when she first left the nest, and how scary it was and how she wanted to go back home. Even though it was scary, each morning the sun would rise and remind her of the beauty of the world. It was lonely, but meeting Chun's father helped her realize that all sorts of things are out in the world. No matter how scary and sad things are, people can find their own happiness. Dinner finishes and the family goes to sleep. Chun wakes up in the middle of the night, finding it difficult to sleep with the feeling of loneliness washing over him. He finds comfort in the sight of the moon, in how it changes each day whenever he looks at it from the hilltop. Outside of the nest, we find ourselves in a somewhat familiar place, on a ranch with cows. Traveling to the right, we head for the hill to watch the moon, on a path full of friendly animals. Tonight, the moon is full, and Chun remarks that the beauty of the moon must mean a good tomorrow. It then begins to rain, and Chun heads back home for the night. As we return home, we find cats surrounding the tree, with the bloodied corpses of our mother and big sister lying on the ground. Our mother has already passed on. Our sister apologizes for not being able to leave the nest with Chun together. She cries for her mother as Chun stands there and watches helplessly. Chun, unable to handle the sight of his family dying, flees into the night. Whether it was a primal fear or the sadness of his family's death, he hides away for the rest of the night in the rain as the moon looks on. Morning arrives like any other morning. Chun is all alone, his heart broken and with no idea what to do. The day to leave his nest has arrived. We can go back home, but there's nothing here for us. Our mother's body has vanished, and our sister's cold corpse remains. There's a red-haired girl who notices us, but offers no help. We can go east to find an old bird, abandoned by its family and dying as it begs for water. Chun feels heartbroken as he realizes how miserable it is, but as he thinks of how the old bird is feeling, it passes away. Soon, Chun's feelings towards the old bird fade away, overcome by the realization that his own family was killed. Chun moves on. Chun then finds a black bird, who states that its black colors have made others avoid it. It asks that Chun leaves, stating that if they stayed together, he might enjoy the company, only to be hurt again in the future. Chun moves on. Chun then finds his big brother, who had left the nest some time ago. It seems he has found a lover to live with, and he cheerfully greets Chun. However, Chun can't find the ability to say anything about what happened to their family, or to congratulate his brother on finding a lover. He simply leaves without a word and moves on. Chun is left thinking about the misfortune in the world, feeling lost. He recalls the birds he passed and his own family's death, yet even then there was still his brother who was happy, despite the misfortune nearby. Chun decides to run away from it all, to flee to somewhere without misery, and takes flight. However, mid-flight, something happens. Chun is struck by Muchasu, who is flying through the sky from the Curse of Curves at the very beginning of the game. This collision causes Chun to vanish into an unknown space, separated from time itself. Chun then wakes up in a mysterious area, the beginning of time itself. There is nothing here in this depressing place, aside from the primordial Chuchan people. These Chuchan are not like the ones we saw before. They are depressed and angry, unable to find meaning within this meaningless world. Some seek out a purpose, but are ostracized by the others for trying. Further in, Chun sees a dead Chuchan, while another one clings onto it and mourns its death. Chun is reminded of his family, thinking that it must be the same as how his family died. Chun tells the Chuchan about his story and how he ran away from sadness and fear, but the Chuchan rejects him. They state that they are different, because unlike Chun who ran away, they are embracing the sorrow of loss. They will stay and pray for the one they have lost. Chun, unable to understand why his story didn't reach the Chuchan, decides to leave, only feeling a lingering sadness. Chun sits on a cliff and wonders, thinking about questions that he cannot find solutions to. Time passes, and Chun wonders why he is so miserable. He thinks to himself, is it because the world he sees is too small? Would a larger world have more things? Or would it be better to just stop thinking? If he had no heart, then would he be able to escape from all the bad things? Chun jumps off the cliff, this time without flapping his wings. Chun awakens in a strange blue space, with corpses littering the path in front of him. He travels forward, the number of corpses increasing. These corpses look just like him, the endless road in front of him stretching on with corpses forever, each with a pained expression. He wonders where he is, why everyone is dead. He wants to see his family, he wants to go back home. For a long time, Chun cries. He cries over the pain of what he has lost. After a long silence, he finds himself in a mysterious room, surrounded by unknown objects. From here, the concept of time no longer applies to Chun, and he will exist for all eternity. Chun wonders what this place is and why he is here, and he searches for meaning. The meaning of why he is here and why everything has happened to him. He inspects the room. Words that he cannot read. A human, but she does not move. A large square object with the red circle. Chun looks at the circle and instinctively fears it, for it looks like the eye of a serpent, and decides not to touch it. Several hundred years pass, and still Chun does not understand, even after examining everything around him. He still does not understand why he and his family had to suffer so much, why he is here, and why everything is happening to him. With nothing else to do, he begins to speak to the human in front of him. Chun feels like he recognizes this girl from the past, and feels compelled to speak to her in an attempt to create meaning. He speaks about his thoughts, of his family, his sister's death, his desire to go home and see his family. Even though the human in front of him was actually a robot who would never move or speak back, he continued to talk, for he didn't know. Chun would see the robot change expressions as he spoke. Whenever he said something sad, the robot would look sad. Whenever Chun felt angry, the robot would frown. Chun kept talking, and the robot kept listening. An unfathomable amount of time has passed, several millions of years, and Chun has finally finished sharing everything he wanted to say. The robot stopped showing expressions as Chun's heart stopped stirring. He stopped looking for meaning. Chun starts to pray. He prays for his sister who died. He prays for his mom, whom he would never see again. Chun feels a sense of understanding that the harsh realities that he endured weren't just experienced by him. Just as he grieved his sister's death, she felt the pain of parting with him. Just as he feels sorrow from not being able to see his mother feels sadness of not being able to see him. Even though his big brother's family had died, he was still able to find happiness. He is not the only one. Chun begins to pray for everyone. He's not the only one. Chun prays for everyone. Chun finds himself in space, his consciousness becoming too vast to fit into a small bird. He becomes one with the universe. Understanding that he is the same as everyone, and that everyone is the same as him. As the universe is infinite, Chun became infinite too. For tens of billions of years, he stretches out to the infinite expanses of time, seeing everything in the universe and the life it holds, whether happy or sad. Eventually, Chun reaches the end of time. He reaches the very edge of the universe. Chun boldly leaps to the outside of the universe, only to be met with something blocking the way. He pecks at it, and it breaks apart. Chun is born from an egg, finding himself at the top of a familiar tree. His mother, his sister, and his brother are all with him. Just like before, he lives together with his family, until the fated day where he must spread his wings. Everything repeats yet again. The death of his family, the fear and panic. He flies through the sky and collides with the boy yet again, finding himself at the start of time. He finds the familiar scene of the Chu-chan mourning the death of its loved one. However, now things would be different. Chun starts to talk about what he has seen and thought, about how he became one with the universe and returned to the beginning, And this time, the Chu-chan listen. The words of Chun ring through their hearts, and they thank him for saving them. Chun knew where he needed to go next. He finds himself in the satellite, and then he finds himself merging with the universe once more, before being born from an egg. He finds himself in front of the Chu-chan yet again, telling them the same story. Time repeats itself again and again. Chun is in front of the old dying bird, begging for water. Chun apologizes, stating that although he can't help them, he can be there for them. The old bird thanks Chun before passing away. Chun speaks to the black bird, sharing his story. Although the black bird rejects him, saying Chun would never understand, Chun says they have it all wrong. It's not about comparing sadness, as everyone has hard and happy times. The black bird says its whole life is pain, with no happiness. Chun asks if talking with him is painful, for he enjoys talking with the black bird. The black bird says that it's afraid of the pain it might feel if Chun were to hate it, but Chun says neither of them will forget the happiness of talking to each other, of not being alone anymore. The black bird thanks him. Chun finds his brother, this time simply congratulating them and wishing them happiness. For eternity and endlessly, Chun expands and multiplies. Through countless universes and timelines. One Chun couldn't take it anymore and smashed himself against a rock and died, but still Chun continued. Time blends together as the impossible limits of infinity were put to the test. Nobody knows how much time has passed since then, or the number of Chuns out there. The consciousness of Chun is infinite and impossible to distinguish from the universe. Still, there is one Chun lingering in the space satellite as before. He finds himself looking at the strange square against the wall, the one with the red circle. This time, he does not fear it, but instead ponders its purpose. He realizes he wants to push it. Wow, what a great section. This part of the game, Chun's story, is one of the most iconic parts of the Towelket series, and for good reason. It seems to come out of nowhere, starting off as what seems like a completely pointless and unrelated story to what's going on. But before you know it, it's evolved into an amazing summary of Towelket 1's themes and the philosophy it's trying to present. Chun starts off as an innocent child who is torn from his family by an unfortunate event, completely out of his control and with no reason behind it. His coming of age was not the result of the day that his family spoke of, but from his innocence being shattered by the cruel reality of this world. Faced with this trauma, he fled, unable to process the emotions he was feeling. And who can blame him? After all, he is just a weak, powerless bird, with no idea on how to react to such a situation. As he runs from his home, he finds other birds, wallowing in their own misery, but Chun is powerless to help. He doesn't know what to do or say. He can't do anything to solve these problems, so why do anything? He doesn't even know how to react to another's happiness at this point, so he does nothing. The longer he looks at these other birds, the more it reminds him of his own pain, so he would rather leave than be reminded of what he went through. When Chun meets the Chu-chan, they seem to be a hateful group of people who shun the idea of trying to find meaning and lack a purpose. When Chun finds the crying Chu-chan, he shares his story, hoping for sympathy, but he is turned down. Here we are clearly told that there are two ways of responding to suffering: to run away from it like Chun, or to embrace it like the mourning Chu-chan. Still, Chun doesn't understand, and he continues to flee. Chun then tries to question why he doesn't understand. He wonders if it would be better if he did not have a heart, the thing that allows him to feel these emotions. From there, he decides that if he can't change reality, and thinking about it only makes things worse, then why try? From there, he kills himself, the one thing he has the power to do. However, instead of ending it all, he is brought to a path. a place where the countless deaths that he has and will experience are shown. This is the cycle of suffering for Chun, proof that he is trapped in a cycle and suicide will not free him. The infinite expanse of this location and the infinite number of Chuns show the countless times Chun has gone through this cycle. Then Chun finds himself on the satellite. Hundreds of years of grief pass, but realizing that he cannot grieve forever, Chun begins to seek meaning. He wants answers. He wants to know why these things have happened to him and to others, but looking around provides no answers. After all, nothing in this room has anything to do with him. There's the button on the fridge, but even after what he's been through, Chun is still just a bird, a childish one at that, and he can't bring himself to interact with it even after all this time. This room is essentially a dead end, a place with no meaning. Needing to speak to someone, anyone, about how he feels, he begins to talk with Armtan in a conversation. This is clearly a pointless conversation, as the Armtan he's speaking to is inactive and will never respond, but he does so anyways. Armstrong can't show emotions, but Chun projects the emotions that he's feeling onto her. This sequence is about how humanity tries to create meaning inside of a silent universe. Just like how humans try to communicate with a universe that doesn't respond for answers, Chun talks to this robot that will never speak. Not so the robot can understand his feelings, but so he can understand himself. Seeing these emotions mirrored from Armtan back to him allows Chun to understand the feelings he has experienced. He recounts his story countless times over millions of years, and eventually he exhausts the desire to sell someone else. His heart stops stirring, and he realizes that these feelings he's had aren't just things he's experienced, but what others have as well. Just like how Armtan mirrored his feelings back at him, he realizes that his family has as well. His family suffered and lost Chun just as Chun lost them. From here, he realizes that he can't just focus on his own misery, but of others as well. The desire to understand what others have gone through results in his view expanding, not just figuratively, but literally, as he becomes one with the universe, experiencing all the joy and pain the universe has to offer. Just as he was thinking on that cliff, his worldview was too small, limited to the world of a small bird, but instead of shutting off his heart, he now wants to see more. He desires to see what everyone experiences, and grows past being just a small bird. Then, just as he understands everything, he is brought back to the beginning. Time is a circle, just as the Chu-chan have said. Even though this journey seems to be infinite in size and time, it's still just a part of his personal experience. Despite all the knowledge he's accumulated, he is still powerless. He is still just a small bird, and he can't stop what will happen. His family still dies. He still crashes into Muchasu, and the cycle repeats itself. This is the cycle of suffering that Chun is trapped in that the Chu-chan spoke of. However, even if he is physically powerless to stop reality, he now has a stronger heart, and a wider perspective. He doesn't have the power to stop the old bird from dying, but he can stay by their side. It seems like a pointless action. After all, in the end, the old bird will still die. Nothing about this reality has changed. But by being present, the old bird dies with someone caring for them and thanks Chun for helping them with their suffering. The blackbird rejects Chun, but Chun understands now that suffering between people isn't something that should be compared. Even if this moment of happiness is just an inconsequential thing over the course of the blackbird's life, it's something that's happened and can be remembered fondly. Lastly, Chun meets his brother, simply congratulating him and wishing him happiness. It's a small gesture, but it shows that Chun can appreciate the happiness of another person, not letting his own personal grief ruin another's joy. Chun isn't solving any problems. He's not fixing anything, but he understands that suffering is not a reason to withdraw from the world or others. Even if you're powerless, you can still do something. Anything. Even the smallest of actions. And it can still make a monumental difference to someone. After all, his whole section just amounted to pressing a button. An extremely simple task anyone could do, and without even knowing what the button did. But as small as that action was, it meant everything to Muchasu, whose life depended on it. So there's a lot of lessons you could glean from this, like the idea of understanding others' suffering, and the ability to sympathize with others instead of focusing on your own misery. but I'll summarize the two most complicated lessons I got from this segment. First, there is no inherent meaning or reason, it is created. When Chun languished over his misery, he was looking for a rational reason behind it, when there was none. Things happen in this world beyond our control, often for no reason. Humans often try to explain or justify the reasons why bad things happen to good people, often through the ideas like karma or a greater power. When tragic things happen, people are always looking for something to blame. What Chun learned after centuries of thought and ages of searching for answers in a pointless room was that no, there wasn't a reason, and that was the first step to understanding. The universe wasn't going to explain itself to him. Instead of there naturally being a reason for him to continue living, Chun created one. He spoke to Armstrong, but really he was just speaking to himself. He was trying to understand himself, and from there he realized there was no reason for what happened to him. Instead, he is the one responsible for creating his own meaning and purpose in this universe which acts without reason. The second lesson is that no matter how powerless you are, you can still do something. The answer to being in a universe that does cruel things outside of your control isn't to become powerful enough to control it, but to do what you can. Instead of withdrawing or running away, do what you can, even if it seems hopeless. We actually saw this earlier with Kerbas and Conchelle, where Kerbas was crying over his powerlessness to save the Conchelle robots. It seemed tragic that there was nothing he could do to save them, and he was on the verge of breaking because of it, but we'll soon see how much of a difference his actions make. One more thing I have to bring up about Chun's whole section, as this is something that I think many people might miss, is that it really contextualizes a lot of the game's events, both events that have happened now and later. Muchasu is trapped in the high-tech fridge during Chun's section, but here's something of note. The first time Chun goes through here, he doesn't press the button, yet he reaches the end of time as part of the universe later. This means that during that universe, Muchasu is trapped in that fridge forever. The game we were playing ended in failure, as Muchasu essentially died in that fridge. This didn't just happen once, but a near infinite amount of times. We are just playing that one extremely specific timeline where we were freed from that fridge. This logic doesn't just apply to this scene either, but the entire game. For example, wasn't it a huge coincidence that there just happened to be a fridge on the island for Muchasu to hide in? And what was the chance that the fridge was actually running, which froze Muchasu and prevented himself from trying to save the girls and getting himself killed? Isn't it lucky that somehow the little robos didn't find him for 2 million years, despite the fact that he was right under their noses? And that he was found by one of the few robots that wouldn't butcher him on the spot? These all just seem like random events. I know that in story writing, some level of luck is to be expected. After all, a lot of stories start with unlikely events or scenarios occurring, otherwise there wouldn't be a story to begin with. However, these huge strokes of luck in Towelket 1 are pretty ridiculous, right? I think that the Chun section acts as an explanation for these events occurring. It's not that Muchasu got lucky, it's that we just happen to be playing in the one statistically impossible, but not literally impossible timeline where all of these things happened. We are the one single Muchasu that actually made it this far on top of an unimaginably large pile of failures. We are just watching the one reality where an impossible chain of events strung together long enough to make a story. You might just think of this as a ridiculous handwave, like this could just be an excuse to explain any event that might happen, but later the game starts waving such ridiculous things in front of your face that there's no way it's not on purpose. One last thing I want to bring up is that I believe Chun's story is meant to be completely antithetical to the robots in both their motives and actions. However, I'll talk about that later once we see more of the story. You might even have an idea of what I'm getting at now, but this section is already long enough, so let's just keep it in mind for now. Anyways, the game spends half an hour explaining how a bird opens a door. We're back to playing as Muchasu, after some ungodly amount of time. Muchasu has no idea what this little bird is doing here, but apparently he wants to join our party. Unfortunately, as much as you might hope that this universe-encompassing bird is really strong, He's actually a very weak level 1 character. It's a little disappointing gameplay-wise, but Chun's story centers around the topic of powerlessness, so it wouldn't really be fitting if he was any stronger. If we peek outside, we can see the remains of the battle between Armtan and the very cruel rabbit. Although she used a self-destruct attack and it shut her down, through some miracle her body survived and we can take the memory chip out of it. Muchasu comments about Armtan's weight, which seems kind of funny considering how lucky he is that she's still here to begin with, but to be fair, it's not like he knew what happened. Putting the memory chip back in Armtan, she's clearly just as confused as we are after she did her self-destruct attack. I guess she didn't expect to actually survive in some way. She then realizes that Momin is gone, and yeah, he's just completely gone, not even his head is there. Arm never really did get to see him, since the very cruel rabbit prevented her from seeing him after his death. Arm is grieving over the loss of Momin, unsure of what to do now. She says that, of course she feels sad, because she was programmed to like Momin. If she just deleted her memories of him, then she wouldn't have to feel sad anymore. She asks us if we should do it, but she recognizes that no, she doesn't want to do such a thing. Without Momin though, she feels lost, unsure of what to do from here. Without Momin here anymore, it's just the two of us now. Oh, and Conchelle. Right. Yeah, remember her? She's been inside of Arm this entire time. She takes her out, and the absolutely massive case holding Conchelle appears in front of us. Armtan then revives Conchelle and takes her out of the case. It ends up that for the several hundred millions of years we were frozen, and Conchelle was stuck in that case inside Armtan, Conchelle was actually conscious the entire time. She was stuck, unable to move in total darkness inside of Armtan. Conchelle's mind shut down over time, unable to move or see or do anything. The only thought that remained in her mind and prevented her from going completely insane was one of the last things she saw: the sight of Muchasu appearing in front of her after 2 million years of waiting. And then the game continues. I don't think Muchasu and Arm really comprehend exactly what Conchelle went through, as it was just told to us through narrative text, but they sort of understand that she's not acting normally and her mind needs to be fixed. We're now able to explore around again and inspect the surroundings of the satellite. Armtan seems to recognize that a lot of time has passed, but how much time exactly isn't known. There's a computer in the room whose clock can count up to 100,000 years, but it stopped working. All of the paper in the room is blank, because the ink on it just faded away. It's safe to say there's no trace of Momin for a similar reason. With Momin absent, we're on our own now. There's nothing left for us on this satellite, so we decide to head off into space. Armtan changes bodies once again into the Poochie model so we can fly off. I have to admit that something that bothers me here is that the Poochie model is still fully functional even after Armtan did a supposed self-destruct attack with it. She even acted like she was going to die during it. Maybe you could just say that Armtan didn't really know what would happen with that attack, and to be fair, you could probably handwave this pretty easily by just saying Armtan could have fixed up the Poochie robot so it was functional again, but it does feel like a bit of a fake out. Now we're left out in space, up to our own devices. Here the game kind of looks like it's railroading you into a series of specific events, but there's actually a lot of freedom given to the player here. We basically have to complete a series of objectives before we return to the satellite to progress the game. The first thing I suggest though is getting your party up to speed. Chun is extremely weak, and while Conchelle has amazingly kept her levels from the start of the game, she's definitely pretty far behind. Thankfully, next to the satellite, there's a Chu-chan village we can grind in a little bit. Apparently, after such a long time, they're starting to change into strange slug-like forms. Some are planted into the ground like posts. Still, as much as things change, Armtan still loves talking about sticking things into her butt and sandwiching herself between coronets. Focus on getting some levels and money just to ensure Chun and Conchelle can take a few hits. Once we're geared up, the first stop we have is the yellow planet, the one with Kerbas on it. We travel across the surface of the planet, the signs of all the misery that happened here gone, outside of the graves Kerbas has made. After reaching the end of the planet, we then see Kerbas and... Oh, what the hell, I thought that was a healing crystal. Okay, after traveling across the planet twice, and avoiding the teleport crystal, we can talk with Kerbas, who is standing in front of a Conchelle robot. He says she is someone very important to him, and she's been sleeping for a long time. He says she had one last thing to say to him, and she's just thinking about what to say. Armtan seems to realize that something's wrong with this Conchelle robot, though. Kerbas interrupts her and asks not to get in her way while she's thinking, and he leaves off-screen. Armtan then wonders why this number 3 robot is here on this planet, and decides to take a look into her memory to see if it can explain anything. We're brought to a scene where Kerbas offers Conchelle a meal, but she angrily tells him that she's a robot and can't eat. Kerbas is feeling lonely though, so Conchelle says he can eat next to her if he'd like. Conchelle then starts to talk about the time she spent with Muchasu, to which Kerbas states that she must really like him. Conchelle finally admits it and states that she wants to see him even if she's just a robot. She cries to Kerbas about how much she misses Muchasu. Time passes, and now Conchelle tells Kerbas that it's time for them to say goodbye. Kerbas is confused, asking if she hates him, but Conchelle explains that as a robot, she's going to stop working soon. Before that, she wants to say one last thing before the end, her final words since she crash-landed here, and then she shuts off. Kerbas tries to get an answer out of Conchelle, but she remains silent. He takes this as her thinking about what to say, and tells her to take as long as she needs. The memory ends. Armstrong is left crying, squeezing onto a confused Muchasu, hugging him for Conchelle's sake. With this, we've acquired the memories of Conchelle. As the game puts it, through pure chance, and shared by no other robots, it's Conchelle's genuine memories. Not because they were made by the real Conchelle, but because they were made with Conchelle's genuine feelings. Armstrong then asks if she could go see Kerbas, as Conchelle had something to say to him. Arm goes to talk to Kerbas, playing back Conchelle's memories. Kerbas is confused at first, but then recognizes that Armtan is playing back Conchelle's last words and listening. When I cried, thank you for being there to support me. When I felt down, thank you for being there to talk to me. And in my final moments, thank you for being here by my side. We see a scene where Kerbas is with Conchelle, who says these were the words she wanted to leave with him, and she thanks him for staying with the robot Conchelle to the very end. Kerbas begs her not to go, saying there's so much she wants to talk about, but Conchelle can't. She's not the real Conchelle anyways, and even if she died, it wouldn't change anything. Those emotions, sadness, and anger were all just a lie, but even then, she felt very happy talking to Kerbas. Even if she doesn't have a heart, that's how it felt. Kerbas says that even if those memories were a lie, the time he spent with Conchelle was real, and it hurts to not see her anymore. He repeats her final words to her, and states that he will live on until the end, where he will express his final piece of gratitude. This scene with Conchelle and Kerbas is a sad, touching scene that relates directly to Chun's story and what it was trying to tell us. Although Kerbas was powerless to fix Conchelle's problems caused outside of their own control, he could still be there with her. Even though this Conchelle is a fake, the memories they made were real, and the time they were together still mattered, and whether the robot Conchelle's emotions are genuine or not doesn't change that. To Kerbas, his time spent with Conchelle has come to an end. He was powerless to recharge her body or solve her troubles with love. But as pointless as it may seem, and although he will never realize it, it means everything to Conchelle and even us. We've received an item vital to our progression that wouldn't have existed without him. Afterwards, the next thing we can do is revisit Earth, and immediately upon visiting it, we can tell it's not in great shape. Scattered about are broken robots, which Armtan can read the memory of to give us an idea of what happened. It turns out that the sun has been getting closer and closer to Earth, and the Armstrong cannon that was fired hundreds of millions of years ago caused a huge amount of damage. Apparently, the damage caused by the Armstrong cannon destroyed around 60% of the planet's functionality. Instead of trying to fix up the place, the newest model robots decided to take everything valuable and leave the planet. This left the older model robots behind, and now we can see the aftermath of what happened. Over the course of hundreds of millions of years, they began to break down, their bodies abandoned by the others. Additionally, scattered around the area, we can find strange bulbous things. We have no idea what these things are supposed to be, but upon inspecting them, the one thing that seems clear is that these things are alive. Some sort of sloshing, squirming creature or plant-based organism. It's a sort of ironic justice of some form to see the planet in a state like this. When we first saw Earth after the robots took over, it was completely devoid of life. The robots had turned it into a dead, metallic planet where not a single life form was spared. It was one thing to kill all of the humans, but to turn the planet into a place so inhospitable that not even the simplest forms of life could survive felt like a vendetta against the concept of life itself. And at the start of the game, it really seemed like they won. I mean, after 2 million years, any organic creature would die from aging, but robots don't die of old age, right? Well, after such an incomprehensible amount of time, it seems that the robots aren't so immortal after all. They've been neglected due to being an old model, and have worn down and died just like any life form. And not only that, but it seems like life is winning in this supposed war in the end. New forms of life are sprouting, claiming the planet once again from the robots. It's incomprehensible, being something that sprouted over the course of hundreds of millions of years, but it's life nonetheless. It almost feels like a cause for celebration. I mean, we're on the life team, right? But then you go further in and start seeing the broken Conchelle robots, and you're reminded that maybe it's not such a sweet victory. Oh, and in this side room there's a magazine for the September edition of the Cow-chan magazine. In this one, she shares some of her favorite food, like cola and chocolate bread. It makes her a bit chubbier, but it's not going to stop her from enjoying it. We go further and further into the building, and it ends up that we're actually going underground. The planet's surface that we landed on was actually the top of the skyscrapers left behind by the robots, and it's just covered in so much dust and dirt that it's buried these skyscrapers completely. This is also where the game starts becoming less generous with checkpoints too. You'll find fewer and fewer stores and healing points the further you go, so preparing beforehand is a good idea. Blocking our way out of this building is a boss fight with a group of the strange life forms. With 3 regular enemies using disabling status effects and a boss that loves spamming AoE silencing attacks, your party is going to be eating a lot of spread out damage. This is a big reason why getting Chun and Conchelle tanky enough was so important. The enemies themselves don't have much health, so you can either try to AoE the weaker enemies down quickly to get them out of the way, or poison the boss before you get silenced and then chip them down. If you don't need to revive Chun and Conchelle constantly, this fight will be a lot easier. After the boss is defeated, we find ourselves in a somewhat familiar place. We're in Scrap Town again, the first place Muchasu was found in the future. Of course, it's a shell of its former self, covered in robot bodies and the plant-like things. We travel to Momon's workshop, where Arm 10 reminisces over her old home. It looks like before we left, Momon left a video recording of himself for Arm, knowing that he would likely die during our adventure. In the film, Momon asks Arm to continue his mission, to bring all the test subjects together to save the world. The universe spins, but it can be changed by our hands. Arm and the test subjects are the only ones who could end this perpetual cycle of nightmares. Everything starts from an egg. Sorta brings into question how much Momon knows about Chun. Armtan, who wants to know about what's going on, decides that she wants to stay behind and download the data she can get from the laboratory to get a better idea of what has transpired over these hundreds of millions of years. We're then left to go off and explore by ourselves for the time being. Wandering off by ourselves, we can get to the train station, but the trains aren't working anymore, so we can just walk on the rails by foot. It's a long trip, but eventually we make our way to Clattering City, the location where the Conchelle robots were made. The city isn't any better off than Junktown, as inactive Conchelle robots sit among the buildings. They've all run out of batteries, so the city has fallen into disrepair. Going to the entrance of the construction site, we find one last working number 3 robot, whose eyes are closed. She thinks we're another robot, and claims that she has no energy left to give, even being forced to shut off her eyes to save power. We can tell her that we're Muchasu, but she doesn't believe us. After all, it's been hundreds of millions of years. There's no way he's alive. Still, she's going to run out of power anyways, so she may as well take a look and see who we are. She stares in disbelief, realizing that we really are Muchasu. surprised that we've managed to live so long. She knows she doesn't have much time, so she asks us to please follow her so she can show us one last thing. Following her, we're brought to a crudely decorated room, with a fake sky painted on the back of the room and a red X that she painted out of nostalgia. She explains that the collection of screws and iron bars are supposed to represent the neighborhood that we used to live in, and she painted flowers from her memories. She then states that it's been 1.5 billion years since the robots left this planet, leaving all the old ones behind. Eventually, everyone started to run out of energy, leaving just her. She's been recording everything in her memory as she lived alone, including the records of Lasagna and Pari Pari Yume. She asks us to take those memories and use them to save the other two girls. With that, she says goodbye, realizing that she's running out of energy, but thanks us for letting her see us one last time. We collect the records of the past from her body, and bring them back to Armtan, who has finished downloading the data from Omen's lab. She explains to us what we've learned, saying that it's so painful to see everything that's happened over the time we were frozen and asleep. She then takes the number 3 memories, expressing pain as she begins to read them. We see a scene where the white number 3 tries to talk to the other robots, but they've shut down already. She begs for someone to talk to. Anyone. Time passes, and the number of shutdown Conchelle robots in the room grows, yet number 3 realizes everyone else has stopped. Suddenly, she hears a voice in her head, asking her what's wrong. Number 3 responds that it hurts. She doesn't know why, but it's so painful. The voice reassures her that she's a robot. The number 3 says that she knows she's a robot, but the pain won't stop, and she'll break. The voice tells her she won't, she can't break, and she won't lose her sanity. She's a robot, a very well-made one. Robots don't break or go insane. Number 3 sighs, realizing that it's right. She wishes she could break, as she's not needed anymore. Armstrong cries for Muchasu, begging him to take out the memory in pain. She's left crying afterwards, repeating Muchasu's name and begging him not to leave her. She's overwhelmed by sadness, saying she'll break if left alone. The Conchelle with Kerbas was able to feel emotions. She could feel sadness, anger, and longing, but she had someone to share those memories with. She had someone to talk to and understand what she was going through. She had to live an unimaginably long time, but she was with someone. In contrast, the number 3 robot was not able to express her emotions. If you didn't realize it, this number 3 robot still has the emotional suppressing screw inside of her. She struggles to understand why she feels the way she does. The moment she starts to feel something like fear, the voice in her head, certainly this screw, immediately invalidates her feelings. She's left with no one but herself, unable to express what she wants or how lonely she is. She knows it feels wrong. It's something like pain, and she wants it to stop, but she can't. This comparison between the two is related to Chun's story once again, representing the 2 different ways people can react to suffering. Both robots had to live for 1.5 billion years, but one was able to express her sadness and pain to another, while the other was forced to repress those same feelings. The white number 3 screw is representative of someone who is forced to internally deny their own emotions. It's not Conchelle's fault, as the screw was embedded by someone else against her will, but treating yourself this way results in a painful purgatory of loneliness. Either way, it shows just how much Kerbas did for Conchelle. If he was absent or refused to talk to her, she may have ended up just like this number 3. I think this comparison between the 2 Conchelles is also going to be an important factor in one of this game's biggest overarching themes, but we'll save that for later. One last thing before we leave this room, and I can't stress this enough, is that you have to interact with the curve warping screw on the floor here. The same screw that fell out of Muchasu's head when he first came to the future. Previously, every time you looked at this screw, you'd just leave it on the floor, but only now does Armstrong suddenly get the idea to pick it up. This screw is a vital item that you can't beat the game without, and the game doesn't give you any hint that this screw that's been sitting here for 1.5 billion years is important. So chances are if someone gets stuck in this game, it's because of this screw. We've now done everything we need to do to progress, and can return back to the space satellite. The first thing we can do now is use the memories of the Conchelle bot on the yellow planet to restore the Conchelle with us. I guess it's just something Armtan can do with humans. Armtan then leaves the room to let Conchelle have some alone time with us. Conchelle tries to talk to us casually, trying to let us know what's happened, but of course it's a bit hard to summarize 1.5 billion years in a conversation. She just asks us to stay with her this time. We're left back in the space satellite, and we can talk to Arm about what to do next. We can decide to live with her forever just like this, in which case we stay here until we die. Wow, thanks Kanao! The real thing we can do is tell Armtan to embed the warp screw we picked up back into our head, which even Armtan is surprised at. But since the other subject bodies are nowhere near here, the warp seems to be the only way forward. Armtan then performs what I can only call open skull surgery on Muchasu without any anesthetic, which is painful enough to cause our silent protagonist to actually speak. Afterwards, everyone prepares to warp, and Muchasu makes a curve as the two girls hang on to him. We're then brought to Lasagna's point of view in the past, where... Holy shit, is that a Cow-chan We're brought to Lasagna way back in the past, writing in her diary about how Conchelle tried to lie to her at school today. She then writes about how much she loves Muchasu, but Conchelle is causing her trouble. She wishes Conchelle could get a fever and skip school so she could have time with Muchasu by herself. That's a little possessive. Just then, she hears a loud banging at the door and goes to check it out. But more importantly, we can check the Cow-chan magazine. This is the October issue, where she talks about how much she loves her favorite drink, hot chocolate with milk. It's getting cold, so she asks everyone to drink hot chocolate with her milk. Lasagna says that she bought this because Muchasu is always reading them, but she doesn't really get it. Maybe she should dress up as a cow too? Checking the door, it ends up that it's Muchasu. He greets Lasagna-chan, asking her if she'd like to view the moon together and to forget that nasty blue-haired girl. He tells Lasagna to follow him. Lasagna cheerfully follows behind, eager to have a romantic moment with Muchasu. She meets him alone near his house, in the quiet privacy of the night with no one else around. The two sit by the river, enjoying the lovely night. Muchasu then tells Zarigani-chan that although the moon is beautiful, she is even more beautiful. He confesses his love for Laguva-chan, and Mona Lisa-chan says that she loves him too. Muchasu then embraces Gagaza and asks Moganiga-chan to dance with him, to which Gagaga-chan gleefully agrees. Kanemisu-chan can hardly believe how lucky she is as Muchasu spins Gaganya-chan around him in a circle. Mogajuga-chan can't hold herself back anymore, but unfortunately it's too late, and soon enough she's sent flying off into the sky. Lasagna is dropped off into the familiar site of the little Robo Lab, with Conchelle and PPU already waiting there for her. You can talk with the girls, and soon enough as expected, Muchasu drops in. Things play out just as they did, with Muchasu and Conchelle being pulled out of the room. This time though, we follow Lasagna and PPU's perspective as they try to escape. Conchelle's already gone once we leave the room, and the game gives us an ominous warning about the robots, saying that they'll take our brains if we're not careful. If it's not clear, the game's telling us that this next section is going to be full of instant death robots. Make sure to save often, maybe in multiple slots if you want to be safe. Taking a different route from Conchelle, the first room we enter has a Conchelle robot in it, and a dirty trick in it too. See that click point up there? You want to check it out, right? Well, the moment you try getting close to it, this robot bursts out of the locker to try and kill you. Jesus Christ, it spooked me even though I've played this game multiple times before. Just to add insult to injury, this talking point here isn't even particularly interesting, and if you read it, you're probably dead. Outside of the room isn't much better, as you don't get far before another robot gets in your way. It gleefully says it'll turn Pari Pari Ume into an umeboshi pulp, basically pickled plum. and lasagna into a shredded cheese and ketchup paste. I think this is the most self-aware this series ever gets about the characters' names. We run through a bunch of rooms and hallways, with more and more instant death robots chasing us down. Eventually, we make it to a room where we find Conchelle's brain has already been ripped out. We fight the robot who ripped out her brain, but now we're trapped in this room with Conchelle's corpse. Lasagna is overwhelmed from it all and starts to vomit, with Pari-Pari-Yume trying her best to keep her calm. It's not long though before the robots start banging on the door, trying to break their way inside. Pari-Pari-Yume tells Lasagna to go hide somewhere, and it's clear that we can go hide in that locker over there, but if we check on Conchelle's corpse again... Oh, ew, that's disgusting. I don't need to hear about something so Wait, we just picked that up? Are you telling me that Lasagna and Pari-Pari-Yume, when they're about to be horribly murdered by killer robots, just decided to scoop the stuff up in their hands and put it in their pockets? And each time you interact with Conchelle's dead body, you can pick up more. In fact, you can get an infinite amount of vomit here. I know this is going to sound a little strange, and I know we might have some more important things to worry about right now, but it's a good idea to pick up this vomit. A lot of this vomit. Feel free to sit here and collect 99 if you want, but if that sounds like too much, let's just say 56 vomit should be enough. Anyways, once both girls' dresses are filled with vomit, head over to the locker in the corner of the room. Pari-Pari-Yume pushes Lasagna inside and tells her to stay hidden while she searches for another place to hide. Unfortunately, there really isn't another good hiding spot, so she tries to hide behind a machine on the other side of the room. The little robos eventually break in, looking for the girls. The two girls try to stay quiet, but Pari-Pari-Yume is found almost immediately, as her ponytail is sticking out from behind the machine. She screams in fear, but the robot tears out her throat. Lasagna flees in fear, as the locker was actually a passage that led to the outside of the island. She panics, scrambling for a hiding spot or a place to run, but there's nowhere to go but the coast. Unfortunately, there's a robot there waiting for her, the one that was originally looking for Muchasu. It complains about not being able to find him, but upon seeing Lasagna, its mood quickly changes. It rips off her feet as the scene fades to black. We then see this scene once again, where the two little robos stand over Lasagna's mutilated body. It plays out the same just as it did before, with the robot explaining that it doesn't matter how damaged Lasagna's body is. As long as they have the brain, that's all they need. Afterwards, we walk through an empty gray space before Lasagna walks up to her own corpse. A cat's meow is heard, and a black, bloody cat appears before her. It tells her that the two will be doing it again and again for all eternity. Another familiar scene appears before us. It's the scene of when Conchelle lied to Lasagna so she could walk back home with Muchasu alone. Conchelle lies to Muchasu, saying Lasagna left without the two of them, and Lasagna confronts her again for lying. Lasagna then tells Conchelle that she's going to kill her, and she turns Conchelle into a bloody mess on the ground. We hear the cat meow again, and it returns, telling Lasagna that she didn't kill Conchelle. That's wrong. She needs to try again and remember correctly this time. We go back to Muchasu, and we drop down on an X in the middle of a strange yet frankly cute place. A floating robot Lasagna nearby shows shock at seeing us, saying that it's been billions of years. She says that she drew the X here, hoping that one day Muchasu would show up. She still remembers the lovely night she had dancing with Muchasu. We fill her in on the details, saying that we're looking for her main body. She is a bit disappointed, as she's just a medium-sized lasagna and not the original. She explains that this town was created so she could restore memories related to Muchasu, Conchelle, and Pari-Pari-Yume. We should go talk to the big lasagnas for more information on the location of Lasagna's body. This might be one of the most creative and charming locations I've seen in an RPG game. This Lasagna Town has such a cute atmosphere to it. The giant faces on the buildings, the wonderful music that slightly changes as you traverse through the town, and my favorite, the funny small lasagna squares that just say, "I'm lasagna." However, it's not just cute either, as there is definitely a sense of melancholy over the town. Although the lasagnas have created this seemingly cute and busy town, many of them express sadness and loneliness. Each lasagna is essentially just a container for memories, which have been accumulating this entire time, necessitating the creation of larger memory banks in the forms of more lasagna robots. The game doesn't spell it out for you, but you can tell that she's nostalgic for the life she had back on Earth. She's attempted to create fake flower fields to represent the life that she misses back on Earth, and the item store actually sells things like bread and plums as consumables. You know, human food instead of uranium. The flowers are made of gears, so I don't really know if these are real human food, but I like to imagine it as Lasagna liking cooking so much that even after 1.5 billion years, she's still trying to do it. They are robots that have specifically been designed to remember when life was better, and they have had nothing to do but think of those memories for all this time. The town's got some interesting quirks too. There are maps that loop in on themselves, buildings within buildings, and doors that vanish behind you. It's got some non-Euclidean design to it. There's also lasagna guard robots everywhere. They don't chase you, but they're actually surprisingly difficult encounters. They can come in big groups and spam pretty damaging AoE attacks. Since they don't chase you, it's easy to just avoid them, but you might honestly want to try and get stronger here, because the healing crystal at the start is the only one you're going to have for this entire section, and running back to it is pretty tedious. There's pretty good gear for sale here, but it's really expensive. If only we had something to sell for money. Anyways, continuing through the town, we eventually find what the lasagna must have been referring to as the big lasagnas. They're, well, big lasagnas. Speaking to one, it explains that the lasagna memory containers had to get exponentially larger over time in order to maintain and store all of the memories being collected here. In fact, the amount of memories has gotten so large that this glass dome we're in isn't large enough, and the recovery process is being done in outer space. She then notices Conchelle is with us, and remembers how nostalgic it is to see both of us again. Here, she tells Conchelle that she entrusts Muchasu to her, as she's already come to terms with losing Muchasu romantically. Her statement causes an alarm to sound, and she's forced into attacking us as she begs us to kill her. It's a pretty easy boss fight now that you've got 4 hopefully leveled characters, but you can't help but feel bad about it. After beating her, it opens the door next to her, which leads to Lasagna Space. Lasagna Space has, well, even bigger lasagnas. The lasagna operation has gotten so large that there are now giant lasagnas, even bigger than the Lasagna City glass dome we were in earlier, maybe even planet-sized. We go further in, passing more giant lasagnas until we find an absolutely humongous one. We are then met with the greatest single line in gaming history. Yes. We're then brought to a scene where we see Lasagna in what appears to be a night version of the school. The black cat is in front of us, who explains that this is the school from her memories, at least in broken sentences. It introduces itself as Nekoashi Kanbu, a guide to help Lasagna find her memories. There was a Nekoashi Kanbu in Towelket 3, but she was a little less creepy there. Inside of the dark school, there are dozens of other lasagnas walking about, looking for something as well, talking about feelings of discomfort or pain, and their fear of Nekoashi Kanbu. Eventually, within this area, we'll find some other click points, which bring up events from the past that we never got to see. For example, memories of Lasagna crying by herself from how she was treated in school, or how she helped Muchasu when he was feeling bullied. Each time we find one of these, Nekoashi Kanbu appears to congratulate Lasagna, calling her a good girl. After finding enough memories, we can progress further into the school, where it turns into a bizarre black and white interior, with strange blobby creatures scattered about. Here, there's no more lasagnas, but instead lockers that talk to Lasagna, bringing up things like Conchelle's feelings for Muchasu and even Kao-chan. Oh hey, there's also a Muchasu running around. I wonder what... Oh. Once we reach the end of the area, we walk into a cozy pink room with multiple Muchasus, asking us to take a seat. When we sit down, Nekoashi Kanbu congratulates us once again, telling us to keep up our good girl streak by waiting in the reward room until next time. There's a good bit to talk about from this section, and I really love how it gives us a deep look into Lasagna's perspective. something that the game hasn't really explored or told us until now. In fact, the game has actually misled us about Lasagna's true feelings. When we were playing as Muchasu, we were given the impression that Lasagna was actually doing pretty well in school. There were comments about Lasagna being too cute to get bullied, and even implications that a lot of boys still liked her. In reality, that was just Muchasu's own viewpoint, and Lasagna was being treated just as badly as he was. For a practical explanation of events for those who are confused, during the past 1.5 billion years, the little robos used Lasagna as a way to analyze memories of the past. It's not explained directly in this version of the game, but the intent was to use her memories as a way to study the experimental body's behaviors, and possibly using what they learned to help find where Muchasu was hiding. However, after being forced to relive through these memories over and over, her emotions have directly affected how she remembers them. For example, we know that Lasagna and Conchelle have always been somewhat upset at each other due to their feelings for Muchasu, but they never actually caused each other harm. After being forced to relive the moment where Conchelle tried to lie and manipulate her and Muchasu though, Lasagna's resentment for Conchelle has grown to the point where she wishes that she had killed her. It's such a human thing to remember an event where someone else upset you in the past, and the more times you recall it, your feelings over the event get worse and worse. It's such a big part of being a human that there's a word for it, a grudge. However, these human emotions distorted the memories that the robots were trying to analyze, and therefore they create Nekoashi Kanbu to control her. Basically, she's a form of positive and negative reinforcement. There's many lasagnas in this system, each of which are tracked separately. Those that perform well are rewarded and put through this process again and again, as we can see from Nekoashi Kanbu's comments about her good girl streak. However, the lasagnas are all terrified of Nekoashi Kanbu, implying that there's a punishment for failing. I believe that this system Lasagna is trapped in is a representation of evolutionary learning algorithms, a method of trying to create artificial intelligence that learns and performs better over time. Essentially, evolutionary algorithms work by creating a number of different sets of logic, which slightly vary from one another. These variants then compete to perform a task, and are scored based on how well they perform. The variants that score the best are kept to compete once again, while the variants that score poorly are eliminated and then are replaced by new variants based on the better performing ones. The multitudes of lasagnas you see running around are these variants, and the punishment they are so scared of is being eliminated, basically killed off for failing. This whole story arc shows how the robots are trying to take something that's such an important part of being human, our memories, and trying to control it like a machine. In their attempt to squeeze every bit of usefulness out of Lasagna's memories, they've corrupted them to the point where it's doubtful if there's any point to this at all. Still, the robots are clearly stubbornly hell-bent on their methods, even if it means fruitlessly torturing Lasagna. Lasagna's experience can also be compared to Chun's experience. Chun goes through a similar experience, where he is forced to relive his past over and over again, but he is not being told why or what to think of it. He at first rejects the pain of what happens to him, but eventually he realizes the error of his ways, and that he is the only one who can make sense of everything. Through his own reflection, he gains understanding and creates his own meaning and purpose despite the suffering he's put through. Lasagna, in contrast, is being told exactly what to think. We know she feels growing anger towards Conchelle, but instead of being able to reflect on why she feels this way, she's being controlled by a machine that tells her that she's simply wrong. She is forced into rejecting her own human feelings and being told what is right and wrong by a process, failing a purpose that was hard-coded into it hundreds of millions of years ago. And it's forcing Lasagna into looking for the meaning it wants to hear, rather than the one she needs. That's why we have to save her. The inside of the gigantic Lasagna is the biggest dungeon in the game, requiring us to destroy several control units scattered around the dungeon to release her. There's also no healing point or store anywhere in here, not even a Fufufu-san, so this is why preparing earlier was so important. You can go back to Lasagna Town, but it's a very long trip to go all the way back to the start just for the healing crystal. Thankfully, you can avoid a lot of fights as always, but the multiple required fights with the control units will take a toll on your resources one way or another. The control unit fights come with a pair of guard lasagnas, and all three enemies will spam AoE attacks and AoE poison that will whittle you down. If you didn't take my comment about oranges from the start of the game seriously, you will now. The dungeon is a bit of a slog with how long it is, but thankfully there's still a large number of talking points. Now with Armtan and a restored Conchelle in our party, the two of them will often talk together. A lot of it is still your usual nonsense, but there's some interesting conversations. My favorite is this one where you see a reenactment of the lying Conchelle scene, and Conchelle comments that she doesn't remember looking so angry. I like to think of this as Lasagna's emotions exaggerating her memory of Conchelle into a more evil, angry person than she really was. Once you destroy all of the control units, you'll find Nekoashi Kanbu standing in your way of finally rescuing Lasagna. Personally, I find this a little weird because I thought she was more like a non-physical program or a concept that only existed in Lasagna's memories, but I guess she has a physical body just for an obligatory boss fight. Anyways, this fight actually isn't too hard, but because of the long dungeon and all the control unit fights, you might have burned through all your items at MP, which will make it a lot more challenging. If you need to run all the way back to town to heal, I won't judge you. After defeating Nekoashi Kanbu, we can finally free Lasagna. Lasagna climbs out of the case, but her eyes are stuck shut, like her body doesn't remember how to open them after this long. Conchelle tries to call out to her, but Lasagna gasps and visibly staggers away from her in shock. She cries about her eyes staying shut, panicking despite Conchelle and Armtan's attempts to calm her down. She tries to run away, but she crashes into Muchasu. Muchasu tells her it'll be alright and to try opening her eyes. She then opens her eyes for the first time in over 1 billion years and looks at Muchasu. Emotional music starts to play, but she then looks back at Conchelle. She wishes it was just the two of us, but this is just how things have to be. The game doesn't give us too much time to celebrate our reunion, as Armtan is already scanning through the memories the robots collected for information on Pari-Pari-Yume, the last person we need to save. She says Pari-Pari-Yume should be located to the east of Scrap Town, giving us our next objective. We hear the sounds of giggling, and awaken as Pari-Pari-Yume in some disgusting dark room. The bed she crawled out of is filthy, and there are strange distorted black shapes standing around the room. Walking outside, there are immobile, purple creatures and bloodstains covering the inside of this building, and Pari-Pari-Yume complains of the smell of rot. Inside of her room, we can see what's clearly another Pari-Pari-Yume rotting in a bed, hooked up to a life support machine. But it's simply described as a thing. There's no music or talking points as you blindly wander this huge building, with nothing but more of these strange, presumably biological in origin, shapes and stains everywhere. After dozens of rooms, we stumble into a clone of Pari-Pari-Yume, standing in front of a rotting shape hanging from the ceiling. The clone is giggling endlessly to itself, saying that our time has not come yet. She tells us that the rotting shape before us is Pari-Pari-Yume. The Pari-Pari-Yume we're controlling doesn't understand, claiming that she's Pari-Pari-Yume, but the clone laughs at us. It says that we're the same as all the other things around us, and will become just like them soon. Our Pari-Pari-Yume's body starts to break down, and the clone tells us that we'll bleed from our eye sockets and be reduced to a pulp. Walking outside, we can see what's happening even more clearly. There are bodies of Pari-Pari-Yume, mid-transformation as they start to transform into the twisted shapes we saw inside the building. They cry out in pain, the more human one warning us that this will happen to us too and to put her out of her misery, while the other one further in its transformation can only beg for death over and over. Further down, we can see a huge twisted amalgamation of many Pari-Pari-Yumes, who transformed into... Oh hey, is that a Cow-chan magazine? This is the November issue of the Cow-chan's monthly magazine, where Cow-chan talks about how it's getting chilly outside. But thanks to her fur, she's nice and warm, and maybe she'll try knitting soon. Pari-Pari-Yume, realizing what's going to happen to her, throws herself off of a cliff, hoping to kill herself before she meets the same fate as the others. Returning back to Muchasu, Armtan says that we'll start looking for Pari-Pari-Yume now. Lasagna is feeling a bit better now, and Chun has decided to park himself on top of her head. It's cute, but basically Lasagna is replacing Chun as a party member now, which is actually kind of annoying. She's whatever level she was before, which is almost certainly lower than Chun, and you actually lose all of the equipment on Chun because of RPG logic. Thankfully, Lasagna is a much stronger character after you level her up, but it's still a bit of a setback. Returning to Lasagna Town, we find that most of the lasagnas have stopped working entirely, their existence meaningless without the main body. Thankfully, the lasagna at the beginning of town is still functioning, and, doing her best to help us, explains that she erased the red X mark. With the X erased, the Curse of Curves will hopefully bring us somewhere else, but if there's no other X mark, all hope might be lost. Of course, we don't have another choice, so we use the curse to warp away. We end up landing back in Clattering City, the red X drawn by the white number 3 still on the floor. Thanks, Conchelle. We then have to travel back to Scrap Town and go east. It's a little bit of a long trip, but there's some talking points where the girls talk about Chun to keep us entertained. The atmosphere of this place is definitely strange. The entire city is completely abandoned. Outside of the countless number of what we know are mutated Pari-Pari-Yumes, you'd think it'd be a scary location, but the party's attitude with this place is very separated from our expectations. You'll enter an area where some mutated PPUs are verbally begging for death, and then Conchelle will just be like, "Wow, this room looks like a teddy bear." Now, what's happening here is that none of our party members actually know that these things are Pari-Pari-Yume. They're just weird shapes to them. They do recognize these shapes as creepy, but clearly the true horror of these things is lost to them. And this results in this conflicting tone where we know how horrible this place is, but our party doesn't really get it. To be fair, they've already seen stuff like the Chu-chan towns where there's a bunch of weird living shapes everywhere. Still, it is really jarring, especially when they can presumably hear these things begging for death. It makes sense, yet it still feels tonally dissonant at the same time, although you should be pretty used to that by this point. Stumbling around, we can find our way to the building we saw earlier from Pari-Pari-Yume's perspective. Although notably, none of the mutated clones we can see here are recognizable enough for our party to see as Pari-Pari-Yume. Inside the building, there's a notable lack of music and talking points, which gives the place a much creepier vibe, although you can actually fight the enemies inside of here if you want. We can make our way to the back of the building, where we find that strange Pari-Pari-Yume clone once again. Conchelle seems to recognize that she looks like Pari-Pari-Yume, but it's immediately apparent that something's off. She starts laughing and claiming that Conchelle smells the same as her over and over again, before Armtan tells her that something isn't right and the clone attacks us. This boss fight mostly just involves you fighting a pretty strong single target. The PPU clone spams AoE attacks which can deal pretty big damage, so you'll probably need to keep Muchasu on healing duty, since he should have a group healing spell at this point. If someone goes down, it'll be really hard to revive them, since they revive with very little health, and Pari-Pari-Yume basically spams AoEs every turn. Lasagna might be underleveled too, and there's no way she'll live through the AoE spam if she hasn't been leveled up. This fight can actually spiral out of control pretty quickly if you aren't careful. Your best bet is to probably spam status moves with everyone and try to stun her as quickly as possible, then buff up while she's stunned. Having 2 casts of defense up on your party can be the difference between everyone taking 100 damage a turn to around 20, so it makes a big difference. After beating her, she lays bloody on the floor as the party surrounds her. Conchelle asks for an explanation, but the Pari-Pari-Yume just talks about how she doesn't understand if there's any explanation behind everything she's been through. She wants some sort of meaning behind all of the suffering she's seen. With that, we're simply left here. Our party left clueless about what happened with Pari-Pari-Yume or her whereabouts. So, the party simply gives up. As far as they know, they were just attacked by a crazed Pari-Pari-Yume lookalike, and the real one is nowhere to be found. They don't know that this incomprehensible hanging mass in the middle of the room staring right at them is the real one like we do, so they simply leave. I want to talk about this section, I really do. I think Pari-Pari-Yume's part of the game is incredibly interesting, but there's one more twist the game is holding on to, so I have to refrain from divulging about it right now. For now, with no more leads, we only have one option: to randomly hope that the Curse of Curves just happens to bring us somewhere. Yes, we're relying on just a pure miracle at this point, but with how many years have passed, who knows where anything is. We first warp back to the X drawn by the robot Conchelle, and then we erase it, leaving the next warp up to complete random and signaling the point of no return. Are you fucking kidding me? This is the sort of thing I was talking about before when it came to the idea of coincidences in this game. Like, I don't even know where to start with this. So first off, the way the Curse of Curves works has always been a little nebulous when it comes to the X. I mean, it's not really explained, but at the start of the game, you'd probably just assume that the X is just a marker. Like, that's the spot the robots have designated through a machine or something, and the red X is just a cosmetic visual to mark where it is. Then you learn from the Conchelle and Lasagna's X's that no, the X isn't just cosmetic, it's literally the drawn X itself that pulls someone who is warping, but at least it seems to be a perfect X drawn in red paint or something, so at least that's pretty specific and intentional. You wouldn't just find an X like that randomly in the wild. So with all of humanity dead and Earth abandoned, it made sense that the only existing red X's were in meaningful locations. But this is just a sloppy red X made by complete accident. This X just happened to be made because two Chu-chan people happened to be killed right here in this exact spot, and their blood just happened to form something that sorta looks like a red X. So now we know the Curse of Curves just makes you warp to anywhere where there's a red X-like shape on the ground at all. The chance that this just happened to be here, of course in the one place we need to be to progress the story, must have been incomprehensibly small. Not only that, but this means that there's likely no other red X's basically anywhere else in the universe. We're in a flying spaceship that has been moving God knows how fast for however long, and we know the Curse of Curves warps you to anything that looks like a red X, so not only were we lucky enough for this accidental red X to appear in the first place, but we were also lucky enough that we didn't have to go through countless other red X's scattered anywhere else in the universe made for any other reason. And the worst thing, we know from Chun's section that this isn't just luck. In reality, there were probably a near infinite amount of alternate universes where we used the Curse of Curves and we didn't end up here. Either the red X didn't get made, or maybe there were other red X's in the universe that prevented us from being pulled here. In those universes, I can only assume that everyone just had no idea what to do and they just died. Our party probably just failed to find Yume, or the robots, or anything of meaning, and had their journey end with a whimper, only for the universe to restart again so they could try and try again. Then you realize that all of this is even more ridiculous when you recognize that this logic has applied not to just this red X, but every X in the game. I don't even think there's a comprehensible number to explain the likelihood that all of this lined up for us. We are just playing in that one timeline where yes, something interesting actually did happen, and thankfully we get to play a game that goes anywhere. And before you think that this is just me spouting off about some goofy little detail that just exists for narrative convenience, you can talk to this Chu-chan person right here who just says, "Oh bearers of meaning, surely you understand how utterly ludicrous this is." The game knows. Kanao knew how absolutely outrageously bullshit this is and wrote it into the story, and it fits perfectly with everything the game has said about the limits of infinity, time, and chance. Out of the few people who actually played this game, I don't think many realize just how many countless eons of time must have passed just to place us here. In all of the stories I've experienced, I don't think anything has ever gotten anywhere near as close to writing the idea of near infinite time in such detail as Towelket 1. Anyways, so yes, we're on a ship, and we can see that it's occupied by little robos and Chu-chan tribe members. However, most of them are encased within these green vats. By examining the ship, we can learn some clues about what's going on. Apparently, at this point in time, the Chu-chan people have learned to artificially recreate Chun's reincarnation process. By creating these green vats and flying a ship to the edge of the universe, they too can reincarnate just like Chun did, starting the universe again but with their knowledge and memories carried over. However, the little robos, still trying to accomplish their goal of creating the perfect thinking program, have hijacked the ship. They are now in the process of killing the Chu-chan clan members so they can use the vats instead, so they can return to the beginning of the universe and try again. Damn, that's some pretty serious dedication too. Oh hey, it's the last Cow-chan magazine. The December edition. Cow-chan was slaughtered to make tasty meat. Bye bye! With the final battle coming up, you've got one last chance to gear up your party for the final boss. Try to get everyone in strike-resistant armor if you can, and get your defenses up. Getting better weapons can help, but poison is still your best friend even against the last boss, so endurance is key. There's also a Fufufu-san shop very close to the end of the dungeon who sells Fufufu-san Acid 3 if you need it, as well as Fufufu Shield, which can help buff up your defense as quickly as possible. It's also a good idea to stock up on stronger healing consumables too. Muchasu probably has decent party heals at this point, but you'll need the extra healing to keep up with all the damage the final boss can pump out, and it'll save your precious MP. At the far end of the ship, we meet with a little robo within a large mecha-like case. It recognizes Chun as the figure the Chu-chan worship, and explains their goal of returning to the beginning. Even if they failed to capture the experimental subjects in this timeline, they'll be able to try again in the next. With that, it attacks us, starting the final boss in the game. This boss fight is actually pretty tough, and it involves you fighting the main robot body along with a left core and a right core. The main body spams strong AoE attacks, while the left core buffs all three parts and the right core constantly heals all three parts. The left core's attack buffs can easily cause the main body to hit your whole party for huge amounts of damage if you can't keep up with it. And the right core quickly heals so much that it'll erase most of the progress you can make. Not only that, but all three parts have a huge life pool which can make this fight extremely difficult. Your one saving grace? Well, it's poison of course! Thankfully, all three parts can be poisoned. Because of how much life all three targets have, expect poison to easily out DPS your entire party. Your first goal should be to poison all three parts and maximize your defense as quickly as possible to ensure the battle doesn't snowball out of control. You probably aren't going to be able to kill the left core before it maxes out buffs on the enemy party, so focus on killing the right core first to stop the healing. Expect to take a few turns as the poison does its work. Then you could focus down the left core, and finally the main body while prioritizing survival, and you'll eventually bring the boss down. Once the machine is defeated, all of the other little robots stop working, as if the one we defeated was the brain behind them all. However, even with the little robots defeated, it seems like a pretty hollow victory. We're now left in an empty world, wiped sterile by the terror of the little robos. As the game puts it, our existence as the test subjects has become meaningless as well. With that, there's only one thing left to do. We go forward, and we find a room with an empty reincarnation vat. A Chu-chan explains that the vat will allow one with the same will and time as the universe to transcend time and return to the beginning, just like Chun did, albeit through artificial means. To reincarnate requires an unfathomable amount of time, and this vat will allow one to live through that process. Without a word, Conchelle pushes Muchasu into the vat. She explains that this is something only Muchasu can do, and Lasagna says her farewells. Muchasu bangs on the vat, trying to get out, but he's locked inside. Conchelle brings up that night that happened so long ago, where the two of them were on the island. The night where she showed him the lump in her chest, which we now know is a screw that was embedded into everyone's chests by the little robos. Conchelle reveals that she's missing the bump in her chest that she showed Muchasu that night, and reveals that she isn't the real Conchelle. It's not just her memories, the ones that came from the Conchelle robot, that are fabricated, but her physical body as well. Lasagna is the same, just an artificial replacement. This is something that the game has been hinting at all along. After all, the robots ripped open Conchelle's head and left Lasagna's body to rot on the beach. The girls we've been trying to rescue this entire time aren't the originals at all, but just artificial clones. They're essentially no different than the countless robot versions we passed by and even destroyed on our journey. They just have an artificial fleshy body rather than a metallic one. We've just treated them with more importance because they look like the human girls we used to know. That is why, as the last remaining original human, only Muchasu is capable of returning back to the beginning and making things right. And with that, he falls asleep. We're back at the very beginning of the game, back in the truck where we started the adventure, although we have a little more company this time. I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure what the implications are of Muchasu having a life-sized Poochie doll now, but it's a big clue that despite being at the start of the game again, it's going to be a little different. Just like we started the game, we climb into the box and fall asleep, before we're thrown out of the back of the truck into the ocean below. We wake up on the island again, and everything seems the same as usual. The girls introduce themselves as before, as if nothing ever happened. However, this time, when Lasagna explains the curse of curves, and asks us to move in a curve to demonstrate, Muchasu tells her that he knows about it already. Lasagna is a little confused at how he knows, but she welcomes him to the island regardless. This one little difference is what changes everything. Now we're left to our own devices yet again, and we can talk with the girls as they plan on making a raft to escape the island. Just like last time, Conchelle offers to give us a tour around the island. Before we continue, we can check out the item store one more time too. It's still the same as last time, mostly just a bunch of early game consumables, but oh, there's that teasing item again. Can be used to tease Lasagna while she sleeps. But wait, I still don't have enough money for it. I ended up spending all of my money buying equipment and items for the last boss. There's no way I can afford it. But wait, unless... Yes, this is what the game has really been building up to this whole time. We can start to leave for our island tour with Conchelle, but this time though, it seems like Muchasu has different plans. Instead of just leaving with Conchelle, we decide to invite Yume and Lasagna along. The two are a bit confused, but Muchasu insists, and now we have a party of 4. As we travel into the island, it's actually quite fun, as now all the girls are together and they comment on our little trip through the island. It's nostalgic being here again after so long, and the extra commentary is charming. As we reach the inside of the cave, there's a pretty big difference though. It looks like the little robot that attacked Muchasu and Conchelle isn't here yet, and in fact the door is unlocked, so we help ourselves and go inside. As we travel through the laboratory, the girls are awfully confused, wondering what the heck is happening and what all of this is. It's kind of funny seeing how this laboratory, which once made the girls fear for their lives before they were murdered, is now just some sort of fun field trip. They poke at the machines and wonder what's up with everything, unaware of what happened in the past. There's also quite a few times where the girls talk about opening a door or checking something, but Muchasu tells them not to because their room's filled with robots. So there's this idea that we're sneaking carefully through the laboratory. Traveling inwards, we find a group of little robos, evilly mumbling about how they'll soon have enough data to complete the experiment and then rip out our brains. I guess we got here a bit earlier than expected. They're shocked at our unexpected arrival and attack us. Thankfully, we somehow have all of our experience and levels from the past timeline, which makes this fight a breeze as everyone is really strong. Well, except Yume, since we didn't really play as her much and she'll probably just die. But outside of that, this fight is basically just an encounter. Story-wise, I don't think it really makes sense for everyone to be really strong, but I think the idea is that since we have everyone together, and we're ambushing the robots as a confident group rather than splitting up and running away in fear, we're able to win. The defeated robots cry out about some doctor before burning out. Right behind them is an extremely convenient master switch, which immediately disables all of the robots. With that, the robot threat which took over the world and terrorized us for billions of years is instantly defeated. I guess it took a while for the robots to realize they should hide the master switch behind a boss fight. With the robots wiped out, we loot an engine from one of the burned out robots. The girls have no idea what the heck is going on, but they're pretty happy about getting an engine to go home. With that, we return to the beach for the night to rest before going home tomorrow. We're back to the night scene, and Lasagna and Yume are sleeping around the campfire. Sleeping, huh? Could this be... It's a little easy to miss, but if you go upwards, you can find Chun wandering around on the beach. Or, as the game simply puts it, a little bird which looks sad for some reason. Because Muchasu was never launched by the Curse of Curves in this timeline, he never hit Chun, resulting in Chun never meeting the Chuchan people. The cycle of suffering, the countless universes and lives Chun went through, and the entire concept of the world repeating over and over again has finally stopped. Chun has escaped the infinite cycle he was trapped in, and gone back to just being a sad little bird. All because Muchasu didn't move in a curve when Lasagna asked. That one simple change has shifted the universe from an endless cycle of torment to one where the robots are defeated. It's sad to see Chun grieving over his family, but it's better than the cycle of torment that he was trapped in. By the side, we find Conchelle by herself again. She talks about something she wants to show us, but Muchasu says it's all fine and she doesn't need to worry about it. Conchelle's a bit confused, but she seems to believe him. She says Muchasu feels familiar to her, as if she met him long ago, and this is the first time she's felt this way about a boy. She then hits him and goes to sleep. Morning arrives, and the four escape the island. This time, though, they no longer fear the Curse of Curves, with the robots defeated. We hear Conchelle calling out for Muchasu as he stands on the roof of the school, telling him that class is about to start. Muchasu thinks for a moment, before happily walking in a circle and smiling, free to act as a human one more time. Such a simple and happy ending. It almost seems anticlimactic, considering the insane story we just went through. We pretty much just went through millions and billions of years, all just to return everyone to an ordinary life. But honestly, after everything everyone has been through, I don't think it should be any other way. Towelket 1 is an incredibly ambitious game, with a story that seems impossibly large, fitting into such a small package. It's a goofy and entertaining game with lots of silly things to laugh at, but there's also a deep story which contains so much meaning behind so few words and actions. There's a lot to appreciate in this game and so much to unpack, all told in a truly unique way that I've yet to see replicated almost 2 decades later. When I first played this game, I really liked it. It was a fun adventure game with plenty of events, action, and humor, and I knew that the game's story was special. However, I don't think I really quite understood just how deep the story was until I took a closer look at what the game was trying to tell me. There's a lot in this game that initially comes off as just straightforward or random on the surface, things that just exist to be used as convenient devices to tell a crazy story, but really there's so much meaning behind them. I don't think there's a better example I can use to explain this than the antagonists of the story, the Little Robos. My first impression on the Little Robos wasn't actually too good at first. They're the antagonists of the game and the reason why the events of the game happen, but they didn't really seem to have much substance to them. For starters, they aren't really a character. There isn't a notable robot character who leads them and has their own characterization. It's just the robots. Secondly, they don't really seem to have a motive. We know that their goal is to make this thing called the Perfect Thinking Program, but that's it. It's never explained why they care about this or what it even does. And lastly, the Little Robos basically vanish for a good portion of the game. There's a huge chunk of the game where they don't even have a presence, until suddenly they reappear at the very end. However, over time I came to realize that the robots are actually the perfect villains for this story. The robots aren't so much a character as much as they are the antithesis of what Towelket 1 has been trying to tell us. Towelket 1 is a game that, at its core, asks what it means to have humanity. This is most clearly shown in Chun's story, which presents the themes of the game in its rawest form. Chun's story is about a weak, powerless bird who experiences great suffering in a meaningless universe. But despite this, he still finds his own meaning and purpose in the existence he has been given. That is what makes someone human. Not the species they are, or whether they are made out of flesh or metal, but the ability to find and create one's own meaning in the world and to create their own purpose. This type of story is present not just in Chun's section, but the entirety of Towelket 1. The whole plot of Towelket 1 is about how a group of powerless characters are thrust into this story full of misery outside of their control, and yet they find a meaning to continue forward, whether it be out of revenge, love, or a desire to make things right. These aren't things that they were being told to do or even had a logical reason to do so, but they're things that they felt were right, and we can understand these motives because we're human. The little robots, on the other hand, are the exact opposite of what these characters stand for. They're the most powerful figures in the story by far. They took over Earth in a week, are functionally immortal, and can create anything they want, whether it be entire cities or planet-sized constructions. However, despite all of this, there is one glaring weakness they have, and that's the ability to seek their own meaning. Sometime before the start of the game, the robots were created by a professor who instructed them to create a perfect thinking program. From that point, this is the entire purpose behind the existence of the little robos. To millions of years, to billions of years into the future, the little robots never question this task. They don't ask why they're doing such a thing, or if it's worth killing every human on the planet for it, or if it even makes sense to try and look for a boy for 2 million years. They were given a purpose by someone else, and that is what they must do, no matter what. This is what makes them machines and not humans. This weakness is not unknown to the robots. The perfect thinking program that the robots are seeking for the entire game is really just the ability to think like a human. It's a program that seeks to emulate human thinking by using the brains of actual humans to remove the one flaw the robots have, the inability to find meaning for themselves. Ironically, throughout the game, the robots are constantly corrupting what it means to be human in a fruitless attempt to become one. Whether it's literally turning humans into robots, seeing human emotions as a weakness, or treating everyone and everything as tools meant to be discarded after use. This all acts as proof that the robots don't understand or even try to understand their own purpose. They aren't trying to become human because they genuinely desire to be human. They're just doing it because they were instructed to. However, the game makes a very strong effort to tell us that this aspect of humanity doesn't literally require you to be human. In fact, many of the most humane people in this game are non-human. Chun, of course, is the most prominent example, but Kerbas is another great example. In fact, he seems even further from being human than Chun is. He's completely detached from being human, not seeming to age or even having a name or gender within the game's plot. Yet even this mysterious creature who lives on a pointless planet with nothing to do still manages to find a purpose in helping the Conchelle robots who crash on his planet. Speaking of that robot Conchelle, she herself is an excellent example of this, as she clearly shows how even a literal robot can become human. She starts just like the little robos. Her purpose is following orders from the very cruel rabbit to hunt down Muchasu, even though we know the real Conchelle would never do such a thing. However, once she's shot down and the screw that inhibits her emotions is removed, she immediately creates a goal for herself. She wants to see Muchasu. It's this event where she regains her emotions and desires that she returns to being a human. However, all of this isn't too cut and dry, as there's a complicated case in the game: Armstrong. Unlike the Conchelle robots or the Lasagna robots, who are effectively cloned from a human personality, Armstrong is entirely a robot. She is a creation of Moment, and despite looking like Pari Pariume and being a kind, wonderful character, she's been programmed to act like this. This is why the Chuchan state that she doesn't have a heart, or why when Moment dies she struggles to understand her purpose or what to do. After Moment's death, she becomes entirely reliant on Muchasu. She does show agency, like deciding to keep her memories of Moment and sticking with Muchasu, but the game doesn't clearly reveal whether she's doing this out of her own will or because it's the closest thing to her pre-programmed purpose. Now, does this mean Armstrong isn't someone worth caring about? Is she just a machine pretending to be a human and shouldn't be treated like one? Well, no, because even if someone or something isn't human, we as humans can create a purpose to care about them ourselves. In Chun's section, he meets Armstrong, but in this situation, Armstrong isn't even acting like a human because she's powered off. She's literally just an object. Despite this, Chun projects his emotions onto her. He sees her as a real person who he can talk to and understand his feelings. He is creating a purpose for her, and through this purpose, she helps Chun more than anyone else in his journey. Just because someone or something is a machine doesn't mean it's inherently a bad thing. It just means that it needs to be given a purpose by someone who can make one. If you think Armstrong as a robot is capable of growing her own humanity by trying to understand human emotions, then you're applying a purpose to her just like Chun did. I think there's also an interesting contrast between how the Chibi Robos failed to understand the heart because of their cruel methodology, while Armstrong is closer than they ever will be, simply because she recognizes and cares about human emotions. This concept of humanity is shared across the cast of characters. I've already talked in length about Conchelle and Lasagna. They're humans who are forcefully turned into robots against their will, despite their human desires in the fruitless effort to try and find Muchasu. But the idea of being forced into a role by a meaning or purpose takes an interesting angle with Pari Pari Yume, who I haven't had the chance to talk about until now. To get the full picture with Pari Pari Yume, you need to have an idea of what she was like in Towelket 2. Without going into spoilers, Pari Pari Yume is a very driven character in Towelket 2 who has a headstrong attitude. She's a character with a lot of agency, and part of the reason why Towelket 2 is such a good game is because Pari Pari Yume is such an interesting character. In Towelket 1 though, she's constantly being labeled as boring or plain or ordinary. When you talk to her on the island, she goes into detail about how interesting Conchelle and Lasagna are, but she just calls herself an ordinary housewife. The robots even say her entire reason for being in the program is because she's so uninteresting. Even the game itself gives her surprisingly little screen time for someone who is supposedly part of the main cast. It doesn't help that she fails to be rescued and becomes absent in the last part of the game. If you were familiar with her in the second game, you'll probably be happy to see her again. You might even be glad that she's married, but in this game, she basically has no presence. There's only one aspect of Pari Pari Yume that seems to get pushed, and it's the idea that she's a housewife. The one defining trait that keeps getting brought up is that she's married. This is the purpose that she has been given in this game, to be a housewife, and the game shows this in a way that's so obvious in hindsight. Pari Pari Yume's purpose and the robot's plans was to research how to create the artificial bodies. They experimented on her to figure out how to create biological clones of the others. Basically, her entire purpose was literally to birth new bodies into this world, just like a good housewife would. You might think this sounds ridiculous, but just take a look at the strange shapes in Pari Pari Yume's area. These blobs, which we know the Pari Pari Yume clones mutated into, clearly look like pregnant women, which I'm sure some of you noticed. Furthermore, these strange bone structures resemble part of a woman's pelvis, and there's even a room where the game puts them together for you. After the robots figured out how to get the cloning process correct, they forced Pari Pari Yume to birth Conchelle and Lasagna's artificial bodies and then abandoned her. What you find at the end of the game is the result of the robots abandoning Pari Pari Yume after they were done with her. They didn't even bother to shut down the facility, so Pari Pari Yume's body mutated and degenerated into this monstrous form, and now it continues to birth more and more clones which suffer a similar fate. Her pre-planned goal from the very beginning of the game to the end is to make children at the cost of her own presence, agency, and personality. Also sorry, but I just want to go on another tangent here, because I'll never get a better opportunity to talk about it. But out of all of the fictional characters in media, we can agree that Pari Pari Yume in this game has suffered the most out of any of them, right? At least in a way that's actually fairly well defined, since Towelket 1 has story justification to use the term near infinite. Think about it, this game takes place over countless universes and time loops due to Chun's resurrection. And not even in the one loop where we win does Pari Pari Yume get saved. In each loop, Pari Pari Yume was forced into the experimental body program, experimented on by the robots, and mutated into this horrible form which we know is some pseudo-immortal creature which experiences endless pain until the end of time itself. That's basically near infinite suffering right there, multiplied by a near infinite amount of timelines. But not only that, in those timelines, Pari Pari Yume creates a near infinite amount of clones herself, which go through the exact same fate and suffer just as much. It's like a three-dimensional cube of infinite suffering. If Pari Pari Yume isn't your number one choice for character who suffered the most in fiction, then you weren't paying attention. And all of this is because she's a married woman. Now before we move on, I just have one more crazy tangent I want to talk about, and that's a theory on how this game is connected to Towelket 2. Now yes, I know that this game's storyline is completely separate from Towelket 2, and you can fully enjoy Towelket 1 without playing Towelket 2, but I gotta mention it somewhere. Now, I'm actually going to talk about spoilers to Towelket 2, so if you don't want to hear about them, skip to this time in the video. Towelket 2 is a great game worth playing for yourself, so don't let me ruin it for you. Still here? Alright, let's briefly mention the insane way this game could be connected to Towelket 2 and 3. So, in Towelket 1, the robots are clearly going haywire after being told to create the perfect thinking program. But we never learn who gave them this goal or who made them. At the end of the game, they mention a professor who presumably made them, but that's it. If you've played Towelket 2, then you could guess that this professor is Professor Ketsuago, the pink-haired professor who created the chibi robos in that game. Ketsuago made these robots off of her young personality, essentially making them child copies of herself. After going through her laboratory, Ketsuago hides the robots in a cave, which inevitably becomes the cave laboratory that you see in Towelket 1. Now here's the thing, in Towelket 2, the game ends with the Lovelip aliens taking over the planet, and every human character we see dies. Now, Ketsuago dying makes sense. The reason why the robots went haywire is because Ketsuago died. And with their master gone, the robots didn't know what to do, except try to follow the last goal she set for them. But where are all the Lovelip aliens? If everyone died, including Pari Pari Yume, then who the heck is this Pari Pari Yume in Towelket 1? It wouldn't make sense for Towelket 1 to take place after Towelket 2 if there's no trace of the Lovelip aliens or their invasion, including the characters they killed coming back. Well, if you watched my video on Towelket 2, I talked in detail about the motivations of the Lovelip aliens. I'd suggest watching the video for a more in-depth explanation, but basically the motives of the Lovelip aliens invading Earth are mostly a mystery. However, there's subtle hints in the game that the Lovelip aliens are seeking to improve their own biology through genetic engineering, modifying themselves using human genetics and eventually becoming more and more human-like. What seems to have happened in Towelket 1 is that the Lovelip aliens succeeded in conquering Earth and wiped out all of the humans. However, because they were engineering themselves with human DNA, they eventually turned into humans themselves, in an ironic twist of fate. All of these human characters in Towelket 1, from Muchasu to Pari Pari Yume, are the result of Lovelip aliens that became so integrated with human DNA that they evolved into humans themselves. Every human in this game is essentially a descendant of the Lovelips. Presumably, the reason why Pari Pari Yume looks like Pari Pari Yume is because the aliens took her DNA from her corpse, and eventually it resulted in one of them looking like her again, and the same thing happened with Conchelle too. Now, this process didn't happen overnight. It's implied that quite a long time passed since then, which is why the flooded underground cave area eventually turned into an island. This is also why the robots seem to have such a hatred over the humans in this game. They still recognize them as the Lovelip alien invaders. In a way, you could almost say they are justified over killing everyone. But alright, if you thought this theory was crazy, it's about to get even crazier, because there's another detail to talk about, and that's Poochie and her satellite. So if you remember from Towelket 3, Poochie is a dog robot created by the Kasetsu aliens. In one of her endings in that game, she returns to her secret space satellite and shuts down. This is the same space satellite that Momon finds, with Poochie still inside of it, and he decides to use Poochie's body as a spare body for Armstrong. I can only hope he kept her memory somewhere at least. This connection to Towelket 3 is also why Momon has access to the Pongrim spaceship. He's a descendant of his. Now, here's something you might have noticed. In Towelket 3, most characters are supposed to be tiny, like 100 times smaller than a human tiny. This includes Poochie herself. A huge part of Towelket 3's plot is that everything is happening within a tiny world. If Poochie is supposed to be 100 times smaller than a human, why is she the same size as Muchasu? In fact, the pawns are supposed to be tiny too, aren't they? This is where the Lovelip aliens come in again. During Towelket 2, one portion of the game reveals that the Lovelip aliens are working on shrinking technology, supposedly as part of their invasion strategy. There's a whole part of the game where you have to shrink, and then you find the pawns and the other tiny species hiding away from the aliens. They are essentially untouched by the invasion, using their tiny size to hide away. The pawns also have access to the magic book from Towelket 3, which can be used to shrink or grow things. I believe that there's two things that could have happened here. Either the Lovelip aliens shrank themselves down, resulting in them becoming the same size as the pawns to attack them. Or the pawns used the book to shrink the aliens down so they could fight them directly. This is why the pawns and Poochie in Towelket 1 are the same size as the humans. Considering that the pawns still exist in Towelket 1, they were able to survive against the alien invaders. The pawns were technologically superior to humans, so maybe they put up a better fight and were able to come to a truce. Either that, or the human genetics were making the Lovelips a bit more diplomatic at this point. As for the shrunken chibi robos, well, either they were affected by the shrinking technology or magic as well, or maybe the ones we find in the game are just new tiny ones made to do their job better. There's even the possibility that the Chibi Robo's laboratory in Towelket 1 is actually the insides of a giant Chibi Robo that's been buried in the dirt over time. Which isn't as crazy as it sounds, considering that later in the game, giant Chibi Robos are used as buildings in Lasagna's area. Now, these are all theories of course, as the game is very vague about this information. There's a good possibility that Towelket 1 is more of a what-if scenario that takes place after Towelket 2, but in a universe where the Lovelips never invaded. There is, after all, a scene with Chun finding Yume in front of Mochi's house, just like the start of Towelket 2. According to the theory I just told you, this would have taken place a long time ago in the past, but Chun gets hit by Muchasu pretty soon afterwards. However, it's clear that Chun is a character who is a bit separated from time himself. And if this Yume is the same child PPU from Towelket 2, then when Muchasu hit Chun, she would have suddenly grown up into an adult in a day, which wouldn't make too much sense. I also want to point out that in the Towelket 1 remake, there's a vague note talking about how if the world is conquered by them, then the little robo's goal will be to take the world back, which I think is directly referencing this theory that the Lovelips turned into humans. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything for Towelket 1 or even the series' story. I just think it's interesting. Speaking of remakes though, now it's the time to talk about additional Towelket 1 content. The game actually got a remake later in 2017 in the RPG Maker MV engine, which I'll talk about briefly now. Just note that for the footage on screen, I'm using a machine translation to make it easier to read, as there's no real translation for this game right now. The MV remake adds a few additions to the storyline of the original game, including some scrapped storylines and clearing up some somewhat vague lore of the original. For example, the game has a few cutscenes showing Momon and Yume's relationship in the past, which explains why Armstrong looks like Yume. Conchelle also gets a lot more attention in this remake. We get to see a hilarious scene where the robots trick Conchelle into a box with the Towelket inside of it, and then send her back to the island, which resolves a weird plot hole of Muchasu leaving his favorite Towelket behind, if you could even call it a plot hole. There's also these very entertaining dating scenes with Conchelle later in the game, which are a great touch. Lastly, there's this really great change to how Yume's section is introduced. It's got some great writing, and it genuinely wouldn't be out of place in a horror game. If there's any reason to play the remake, it's honestly this part, because despite lasting for only a few minutes, the writing is extremely unsettling and uncomfortable, very fitting for the situation Yume is in. As for some other changes, the combat is also quite different now, using RPG Maker MV's combat system. It's a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. The game is a lot easier, which I personally don't like, but maybe some people would prefer that. The characters' roles in combat are better defined, which is nice though. For some reason, Chun in this game is actually this really strong, berserker-like character who automatically attacks each turn and does tons of damage. This is kind of funny, but it does sort of take away the whole powerlessness part of his character. Unfortunately, that's sort of where the good parts of the remake end for me, and I do think there's a few things holding it back. First off, you can sort of tell that visually the game has a mix of old sprites and newer ones, which looks pretty strange. Admittedly, it's a small complaint, but it does look extremely weird at times, especially later in the game. Secondly, the soundtrack to this game is definitely pretty messed up. I think Kanao must have had some difficulty bringing most of the MIDI soundtracks back. probably because RPG Maker MV doesn't natively support MIDI files. As a result, a lot of the great songs from the original are missing in this game. I wouldn't mind too much if they were replaced with new fitting songs, but a lot of the soundtrack just doesn't make sense, because Canal just uses random classical pieces instead. There's a lot of cases where the music just doesn't sound right, and that's saying something considering how Towelket somehow manages to make playing cheerful music during a murder scene work. Although the story is improved by some of the additions that were made, it's also clearly worse in some areas. The biggest offender is Lasagna's section of the game, where if you were upset that there wasn't a Lasagna ending and felt like she got shafted in the original game, well, it's even worse here because her section has been stripped down. Also, despite Pari Pari Yume's section starting off in such a great way, it ends on a pretty miserable note. The mutated Pari Pari Yume now clearly talks with the party and makes it super obvious what happened, but the party acts like the original game where they just don't know what to do. It actually comes off as the party either being dumb as bricks or just not caring about Pari Pari Yume. Not only that, but Pari Pari Yume comes across as an asshole. I guess she became jaded after what happened to her, but it really ruins the whole vibe of her story arc. The ending section of the game where you revisit the robot's lab in the past is also questionable. You get attacked by waves of chibi robos, and Muchasu apparently goes Fist of the North Star and kicks all their asses. It's really funny for sure, but I also sort of think it's a bit of a plot hole that Muchasu was apparently reborn as the world's strongest baby. I know that he kept his experience points in the original game, but that was just a gameplay thing. Now it's an actual story element that he can crush entire armies of robots with his bare hands. Wasn't the whole point of Chun's story that he was physically powerless even after being reborn, which is why everything kept repeating? If he could keep his muscles, then maybe he should have just worked out in one of the time loops and then beat up the cats that ate his family. The most unforgivable change to the game by far though are the Cow-chan magazines. For some reason, the order you collect them isn't sequential anymore, and the months are basically random. This way you have no idea which ones you've missed or not until it's way too late. Absolutely unforgivable, and it ruins everything. Because of these changes, I don't think I can recommend the Towelket 1 remake over the original game. Despite what the remake adds, the original is definitely superior, as I think a lot of the elements that made the original great were lost in the remake. That said, it's still pretty interesting if you've experienced the original. If you've already played the original game and are interested in replaying it with a different coat of paint, then it can be worth checking out the remake. So you might be wondering why there's even a remake of this game, especially if it's not as good as the original. Well, that's because it was made to supplement the release of the light novel. Yeah, this game was actually recognized enough to get a light novel version of it made in Japan. It's actually sort of crazy to think about, considering how underground the rest of the series is. This light novel was released 5 years after the original game was released, and it comes in 2 versions. The PHP Laboratory Edition in 2014 and the Bunko version in 2016. I'll keep it quick since, well, a video of me just showing pages of the story wouldn't be too interesting, but there's some amazing art pieces to look at. Canal wrote the story transcript, and it's clearly based on what would become the remake version of the game. If there's anything notable about the writing, it's that the book does try to play up the cutesy factor of the characters a lot more. It tries to make it clear that these are just little innocent kids thrown into this plot. It also mentions that Pari Pari Yume's husband looks a lot like Muchasu. Apparently, there were also plans to create a Towelket 2 light novel as well, but apparently it never happened. From the sounds of it, Canal sent in a transcript for the Towelket 2 light novel, but never received a reply. I really have to wonder what happened. Maybe they didn't like the darker elements of the game and just couldn't be arsed to give a response? To end my talk on extra content with a more positive note, one fun last thing to mention is that the Towelket book came out with these rubber straps as merchandise. There's Muchasu, Conchelle, Lasagna, and Pari Pari Yume. It's pretty simple merchandise, but you know what, as a Towelket fan, we'll take what we can get. These character designs are actually based off of a scrapped menu from the original game, where the player would be able to put stat points into the characters to make them stronger. It's probably crazy to bring up this far in the video, but yeah, Towelket 1 lacks any sort of special menus like Towelket 2 had, which was definitely a little disappointing, but I'm glad these sprites got some use in the end. I also have to point out that I love how the Dust Villagers from Towelket 3 make an appearance on the packaging, despite not even showing up in Towelket 1. They're just so marketable that they have to be here. With that, let's finally wrap up this video. Towelket 1 is an incredible game with so much to offer. It's got so much charm, emotion, and unique ideas stuffed into a tiny package, yet it manages to make all of it work beautifully. The game has very few flaws, and I don't think you can say you've experienced the best of RPG Maker games until you've played Towelket 1. In fact, I don't think Towelket 1 is just one of the best RPG Maker games, but is honestly one of the best games I've ever played just for the story. It's absolutely criminal that this game has been completely glossed over in the West, and has only been played by a handful of people. It's entirely underrated due to the hand it was dealt. If this game had an English translation back when it came out, I've no doubts it would have taken the RPG Maker fandom by storm. Compared to the older games, Towelket 1 really shows Kanau's progress as a writer. It essentially contains the best parts of Towelket 3 and Towelket 2, combining a goofy and fun adventure with a serious storyline, resulting in a truly unique adventure that you can go through in a day. It shouldn't come as a surprise at this point, but I would easily rank Towelket 1 as an S-tier game. Not just because it's one of the best RPG Maker games I've played, but it's one of the best games I've played ever. If you consider yourself an RPG Maker fan, then you need to play this game. If you're someone who isn't an RPG Maker fan, but enjoys great stories, then this is still a great game to recommend. If you think video games can have great stories, then this is a game that can prove you wrong. Even for those who don't want to analyze the deeper writing, it's still an easy to understand adventure on the surface, with a lot of unique charm and novel ideas that I haven't seen anywhere else. Basically, this game has something to offer for everyone. Wow, so that was quite a video, huh? I knew it would be long, but not this long. It was worth it though, as I think Towelket 1 deserves such a deep dive. Kanao is getting better and better with every game, huh? Towelket 3 was fun, but definitely flawed. Towelket 2 had a great story, but it was a little rough around the edges. Now, Towelket 1 is a masterpiece of its time. With such a great game, I can't wait to see what comes up next. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Oh no, 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 no. No, wait, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. This is where I would usually recommend you go to play the next game in the series, but let's just say this time you don't have to. I'll do it. I'll play it for you so you don't have to. It's something. It's something, alright. And let's just say I have some very strongly worded things I want to say about it. For now, just go play Towelket 1 if you haven't. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on Towelket 1, and if you have your own theories or takes about the events of the game. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time. I'm sure it'll be a very fun video.